It began in the bitter cold of December 1944, when snow fell thick across the forests of the Ardennes and the world held its breath. The Siege of Bastogne was the heart of the Battle of the Bulge, a desperate gamble by a dying empire, a last, furious attempt by Nazi Germany to turn back the tide of war. In a small Belgian town surrounded by dark pine forests and frozen hills, a few thousand American soldiers found themselves encircled by an enemy 10 times their number. Cut off, outgunned and freezing, they faced annihilation. But they did not surrender. What unfolded in Bastogne was not just a military stand, it was a test of human will. For 7 days, the men of the 101st Airborne Division, alongside tank crews, artillerymen and engineers, defied the German onslaught, turning a forgotten crossroads town into a fortress of defiance. Their courage became legend, their stand immortal. This is the story of the Siege of Bastogne, the epic stand in the Battle of the Bulge. By December 1944, victory seemed near. The Allied armies had liberated France, crossed into Belgium, and stood poised on the borders of Germany itself. The end of the war in Europe felt inevitable. But Hitler had one final plan, a counter-offensive designed to split the Allied lines, recapture the port of Antwerp, and force the Western powers to negotiate peace on his terms. On December 16th, under the cover of dense fog and snow, the German army struck. Hundreds of tanks and divisions of battle-hardened troops surged through the Ardennes, catching the Allies completely off guard. The front line buckled. Entire units were scattered. A massive Bulge, the largest German offensive of the war in the West, tore through Belgium, driving deep into Allied territory. And at the center of it all lay a name that would soon become immortal: Bastogne. Bastogne was no ordinary town. It was a vital crossroads. 7 major roads converged there, making it the key to the German advance. Whoever held Bastogne controlled the movement of men, tanks, and supplies across the southern flank of the offensive. When the Germans surrounded it on December 19th, the town became a trap and a beacon. Inside were roughly 11,000 men of the 101st Airborne Division, reinforced by elements of the 10th Armored Division, engineers, and artillery units. They had little food, almost no winter clothing, and dwindling ammunition. Their commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, had been left in temporary charge, and under him the defenders dug in, determined to hold at all costs. Outside the perimeter, the German 47th Panzer Corps tightened its grip. The siege had begun. The weather was merciless. The snow fell in thick sheets, turning foxholes into icy graves. Frostbite claimed more men than bullets. The wounded lay in makeshift aid stations, barns, cellars, even church pews, wrapped in blankets, shivering, waiting for morphine that never came. German artillery rained down daily, shattering buildings and tearing through the narrow streets. The defenders fought from one ruined house to another, firing from windows, slipping through snow and smoke. Tank crews huddled in their frozen Shermans, scanning the tree lines for movement. Paratroopers, veterans of Normandy and Holland, fought now not for ground or glory, but for survival. And still, through the blizzards and bombardment, they held. On December 22nd, a German delegation approached under a white flag. They demanded Bastogne's surrender, promising complete annihilation if the Americans refused. The message was brought to General McAuliffe, who read it, chuckled, and wrote a single word in reply: "Nuts." When the puzzled German officer asked for clarification, Colonel Joseph Harper explained, "It means go to hell." That one word became the spirit of Bastogne: stubborn, unyielding, defiant. As the siege dragged on, supplies ran out. Ammunition was rationed to a few rounds per man. Food was scarce, and the freezing cold turned rations to blocks of ice. Yet morale impossibly held. The men joked through the misery, sharing cigarettes and stories by candlelight. They believed help would come, and on December 23rd, the skies finally cleared. From above, the drone of engines filled the air as Allied transport planes broke through the clouds. Parachutes bloomed over Bastogne, carrying food, medicine, and ammunition. For the first time in days, hope returned. The defenders cheered, tears freezing on their faces, as the supplies fell like gifts from heaven. The siege had not yet broken, but the tide had turned. Then came the roar of engines in the distance. General George Sess, Patton's Third Army. Through snow and ice, Patton had done the impossible, pivoting his entire army northward in record time. On December 26, 1944, his tanks broke through the German lines and reached Bastogne. The siege was over. The defenders, ragged and half-frozen, greeted their rescuers with disbelief and pride. They had held against overwhelming odds, and in doing so, they had stopped the German advance dead in its tracks. Bastogne had become the hinge upon which the Battle of the Bulge, and perhaps the war itself, would turn. The cost was staggering. Thousands of soldiers, American and German alike, lay buried in the snow. The town of Bastogne was shattered, its streets lined with wrecked tanks and broken lives, yet from that ruin rose something greater. A symbol of endurance, of unity, of the indomitable spirit of those who refused to break. The Siege of Bastogne became legend, not because of victory, but because of what it revealed about the men who fought it. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to yield to it. The Battle of the Bulge would rage on for weeks, but its outcome was decided in that frozen town. The Germans had thrown their last dice. The Allies had held their ground, and from that moment forward the road to Berlin lay open. Tonight we return to that snowbound crossroads, to the foxholes, the frozen fields, the smoke-filled ruins, where ordinary men became immortal. This is the entire story of the Siege of Bastogne, the epic stand in the Battle of the Bulge, when courage, cold, and chaos collided in the heart of winter, and a single word, nuts, became the battle cry of freedom. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? The last winter of the war came quietly to Europe. The forests of the Ardennes lay beneath a soft white quilt, their branches heavy with snow, their paths hushed, except for the distant groan of trucks and boots on frozen ground. The men who waited there were tired, their uniforms patched, their thoughts drifting toward home. Rumors whispered that it would soon be over, that the German army was broken, that the spring would bring peace. Fires burned low, hidden from the wind, and letters were read again and again by the glow of a cigarette. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang faintly through the frost. Even the war, it seemed, had paused to breathe. The world held its breath, waiting for morning, and in that stillness, the line between peace and peril became as thin as the mist rising from the snow. The soldiers could not know that the quiet they felt was not the end, but the warning before a storm. The villages scattered through Belgium and Luxembourg seemed timeless under their frozen roofs. Children played in courtyards crusted with ice, unaware of how close the front truly was. Farmers trudged through snow with the same slow rhythm, as always, their carts creaking, their thoughts simple and enduring. To them the war was a distant noise, muffled by hills and miles. They heard of Allied advances, of Paris freed, of armies pushing east, and they began to believe in safety. Yet in every shadow of the forest something moved, A convoy at night, headlights blacked out, the faint metallic clink of armor being prepared. No one understood what gathered in those woods, or how much it would cost to resist it. The world felt smaller with each falling flake, drawn inward toward the still heart of the Ardennes. In that shrinking quiet, time seemed to fold in on itself, as though the earth were bracing for impact. Among the Allied lines, the men of the 28th Infantry rested along the long ridges near Bastogne and Wiltz. They had fought through France and the Ardennes forest, and now they were promised rest. A few days to heal, to write home, to forget the smell of cordite. They built shelters from logs, traded stories, and cursed the cold with laughter that turned into steam. Rations were thin, but spirits were holding. Many believed they would spend Christmas in peace. A strange gentleness filled the days, a rhythm of patrols and card games, of frostbitten mornings and long, star-filled nights. The forest was their companion, vast, patient, and indifferent. And though their rifles leaned silently against the trees, each man felt something stirring, something too distant to name. The peace was too deep, too perfect to last. To the west, supply trucks rattled toward Liège and Namur, their drivers unaware of how fragile the roads ahead would soon become. The war machine of the Allies was vast. Columns of fuel, ammunition, and men stretched for miles, yet it moved like a creature half asleep. The commanders believed the German army could no longer fight with strength. Intelligence reports spoke of collapse, of confusion, of a nation too broken to rise again. In the frost-blind calm of December, that belief hardened into comfort. The idea of a final battle in the snow seemed impossible, almost absurd, and so the great machine slowed, lulled by victory's approach. The forests, the hills, the quiet villages, all conspired to hide the truth that would soon break through the mist. Beneath that illusion of calm, the cold was waiting to reveal its secret. Far to the east, across the narrow roads and ridges, German soldiers gathered in silence, entire divisions hidden in pine forests, engines wrapped in cloth to muffle their sound, tanks disguised as trucks beneath snow-dusted tarps. The air was thick with secrecy and resolve. Orders passed like whispers, no fires, no lights, no noise. To them this would be the last throw of the dice, a desperate gamble to split the Allied line and reach the Meuse. They too longed for home, but for them home was slipping further away with each passing day. Fear and faith intertwined in their hearts, like frost on glass, and as the nights grew colder, they waited for the signal that would turn stillness into thunder. The forest, it seemed, held its breath for both sides. In the nearby towns, the ordinary rhythm of life continued. Shops reopened, bells rang for mass, and people carried their bread through the snow. They spoke of loved ones at the front, and ration cards, and the strange calm of a war that felt distant again. Yet, under the peaceful tone of each conversation, there was a tremor, a kind of instinct that something unseen was coming closer. The wind carried faint vibrations that no one could name. Sometimes it sounded like faraway thunder, sometimes like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The villagers wrapped their coats tighter and told themselves it was only weather. They did not know the forest was already full of men, and in that unknowing the calm deepened, the silence thickened, and the air grew tense enough to shatter with a whisper. The soldiers in the Ardennes wrote home about the snow. They described its beauty, how it softened everything, the ruined houses, the broken fences, the scars of war. It made the world seem new again, untouched. Some said it reminded them of winters before the fighting, of skating on frozen ponds, of families gathered around fires. These letters were folded neatly, sent across oceans, carried through hands that had never known the cold of battle. To read them was to imagine peace, yet peace was a fragile illusion built from words. The snow covered everything, even fear. It was the perfect disguise. Beneath it, men and machines waited, ready to awaken. The winter front slept, but only for a little while longer. The horizon at dusk looked almost holy. The dying sun scattered gold across the ice, turning even the ruins beautiful. Soldiers stood in the stillness, watching the colors fade into blue, their breath rising like smoke from unseen fires. The sound of boots crunching on snow echoed softly through the forest paths. For a moment war felt far away, something belonging to another world. Yet behind that peace, behind every quiet hill, lay movement and intent, lines of force invisible to the eye, but heavy in the air. The stillness grew denser, the temperature dropped, and the stars came out one by one like cold eyes. A strange anticipation filled the night, as if history itself were pausing to listen. And somewhere beyond the trees, the first engines began to stir. By the time the first snowflakes of the new dawn began to fall, the calm had reached its deepest note. The world seemed wrapped in glass, each sound muted, each breath visible. Men stood at their posts, warming their hands, looking out over a horizon that revealed nothing. Then, from far away, a faint echo rolled through the forest. Not thunder, not wind, but something heavier, older and unmistakable. It faded, returned, and then was gone again, leaving behind an emptiness that settled deep in the heart. The winter front was no longer sleeping, it was listening, and in that stillness something ancient began to wake, not just an army, but the memory of struggle itself. Soon the calm would shatter, soon the white world would burn again. And with the rising frost of that morning, the shadows in the pines began to move. The forest was not empty. Beneath its quiet branches, beneath the snow that softened every shape, a vast movement had begun. Engines whispered through the night, their growls smothered under blankets and tarps. The air trembled faintly, as if the trees themselves were listening. Men trudged along narrow paths, their breath white, their eyes fixed forward. They did not speak, for silence was an order, and the forest carried sound like glass. Thousands moved, yet the world around them seemed untouched. A ghost army slipping through the pines, horses strained under frozen loads, sleighs creaked, and distant metal clinked softly beneath the frost. To anyone watching from afar, it would seem that the woods were breathing in the rhythm of something vast and hidden, and in that long breath, the first pulse of the Ardennes offensive began to form. They had gathered in secrecy for weeks. Entire divisions drawn from the remnants of the Wehrmacht and the SS, pulled together for one last strike. Hitler's plan was audacious: to split the Allied lines, drive to the Meuse River, and seize the port of Antwerp. It was a dream of reversal, of turning defeat into sudden triumph. Yet even the soldiers who marched did not all believe in it. They were cold, hungry, and tired, and their faith rested less in victory than in survival. Orders were whispered in the dark, maps unfolded by lamplight that flickered against frostbitten fingers. The roads that led through the Ardennes were narrow and treacherous, but the men moved as though the forest itself guided them. Above their heads branches arched like cathedrals, trapping the sound of their passing. The pines became their witness, their shelter and their silence. From high ridges overlooking the forest, Allied scouts watched the stillness with unease. They saw no movement, only the endless white of winter. Reports had come in, strange noises at night, a faint red glow far beyond the lines, but nothing they could prove. Intelligence dismissed it as restlessness, Perhaps a few lost patrols, perhaps the echo of their own nerves. The calm of the Ardennes was deceiving, and the men stationed there had begun to trust it. Yet sometimes at dawn, the sound of distant engines carried faintly through the mist, and hearts grew uneasy. The forest was too quiet, too steady, as though holding back something immense. The scouts wrote what they could, but their words seemed small compared to what they felt. And so the warnings drifted away into the bureaucracy of confidence, lost in the fog of war. Beneath that fog, the columns kept moving. Each column was a world of its own. Tanks wrapped in branches, soldiers cloaked in snow-white smocks, horses breathing clouds into the cold air. There were men from every corner of the collapsing Reich, young boys and weary veterans, engineers and gunners, each drawn into the same silent rhythm. They trudged forward under stars that seemed painfully close, stars that watched but gave no warmth. Their boots cracked through ice, their rifles glinted faintly, their breath mingled in a mist that seemed almost sacred. They carried memories more than weapons now, of burned towns, of retreat, of lost brothers. Every step was both a duty and a farewell. The roads behind them disappeared as snow fell again, erasing their passage. Ahead lay the promise of a strike that could change the course of the war, or end it altogether. And the forest, vast and ancient, swallowed them whole. In the villages they passed, doors were bolted tight. The few civilians who remained heard the muted thunder of movement through the night, and dared not look outside. They could feel it more than they could see it, a vibration through the ground, a distant hum of machines. Sometimes, in the faint moonlight, they caught glimpses of shapes slipping between trees, their outlines merging with shadow. The sound would fade again, replaced by the sighing of the wind, leaving only questions behind. In the morning, tracks appeared across the snow like the marks of some enormous animal that had passed unseen. The villagers whispered among themselves, too afraid to speak of what they thought they knew. The war which had felt so far away was returning with a new and ghostly silence. And though the dawn still looked peaceful, no one truly believed in peace anymore. The forest no longer slept. It was dreaming of fire. Deeper within that dream, the commanders met in frozen clearings, their breath curling into the air as they traced lines across maps. The names written there, Bastogne, Saint, Vith, Clervaux, were small points in a great design. Each dot represented lives, roads, forests, and fate itself. Orders moved quickly, voices low but urgent. The operation was vast. Hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, all poised to strike with the precision of a single heartbeat. Yet in that immense coordination there was fragility too. A single mistake could unravel it all. The weather, cruel and unrelenting, was both enemy and ally, hiding them from allied planes while freezing their own strength. The officers stood in that stillness, their faces unreadable, their thoughts buried beneath layers of frost and duty, and around them the pines whispered as if they understood the weight of what was coming. As the hours deepened toward dawn, the sounds grew closer. The cough of engines, the faint clatter of treads on ice, the dull rhythm of boots in snow. Somewhere beyond the trees, the low roar of massed artillery rumbled like thunder trapped beneath the earth. It was the sound of preparation, of an army waiting to exhale. The men tightened their straps, adjusted their helmets, glanced toward the horizon, where darkness began to pale. No one spoke of fear, yet fear was everywhere, thick as breath in the cold. It clung to the air, mixed with oil, with the smell of pine and exhaust. Some soldiers whispered prayers, not for victory, but for strength to do what must be done. Others stood in silence, eyes fixed forward, listening to the forest pulse around them. The world was holding still at the edge of something immense, and as the sky began to lighten, the forest seemed to tremble with anticipation. In those final hours before the assault, even the wind fell quiet. Frost covered every branch, every weapon, every face. The light of dawn crept slowly through the trees, revealing a world of ghosts, white, silent, waiting. The soldiers felt it too, that sense of standing on the threshold of history. They had become part of something larger than belief, something that existed beyond victory or loss. The pines stood tall around them, ancient witnesses to the unfolding of human will. The forest would remember, even when men could not. And in that breathless stillness, the sound of an order broke the silence at last. Brief, cold, final. The storm had been gathering in secret, and now it was ready to fall. And as the light touched the first line of frozen branches, the quiet world of Bastogne began to wake to the surprise breakthrough that would change everything. The dawn came pale and still. Its light filtered through a veil of mist that clung to the forest like a memory unwilling to fade. The pines stood motionless, their branches heavy with snow, and for a fleeting moment the world felt untouched. Then, beneath that calm surface, the first low tremor of engines began to hum through the frozen ground. It was deep and rhythmic, like a distant heartbeat echoing under the soil. The fog thickened, the air turned heavy, and sound began to shape itself into something immense. The forest shivered as if waking from a long, uneasy sleep. Birds lifted suddenly from branches, startled by what they could not see. And then, out of the white silence, came the first surge of metal. Dark shapes moving through the mist, engines growling softly like beasts released from chains. The war that had slept beneath the snow had finally opened its eyes. Across the front, men stirred from their blankets in confusion. The night had been quiet, too quiet, and now the ground itself seemed alive. The rumble grew louder, no longer a whisper, but a rolling tide that swallowed every other sound. Allied soldiers peered into the fog, seeing nothing but pale shadows that moved and dissolved in the distance. Some thought it was thunder, others the echo of trucks far away. But the noise kept coming, closer, denser, until it filled the air like a living thing. Radios crackled without clarity, orders blurred in static and disbelief. The winter front that had been so calm only hours before now trembled with unseen power, and before the men could understand what they were hearing, the first shells began to fall, soft at first, like heavy rain striking deep snow. The white serenity of morning had become a storm of sound and confusion. From the east and north, armored columns rolled forward through the mist. Tigers, panthers, and armored half-tracks pushed along narrow, frozen roads, their tracks grinding through ice and mud. The soldiers atop them were silent, faces set, their eyes fixed on the horizon that had once been theirs. The offensive struck with precision and force, slicing through the thinly held Allied lines like a knife through silk. Villages that had been peaceful outposts turned suddenly into pockets of chaos. The snow muffled everything, the noise, the shouting, the collapse of certainty. Bridges fell, communications faltered, and entire units vanished into the fog without a trace. In a matter of hours, what had seemed like a sleepy sector of the front became the heart of a storm no one had expected, and from the chaos, a new name began to rise in hurried voices and desperate radio calls: Bastogne. The men who defended the outposts along the roads to Bastogne found themselves facing shadows that moved with terrifying purpose. Columns of tanks emerged from the fog, their silhouettes merging with the forest until they were almost part of it. The defenders fired what little they could, their courage flickering like small flames against the weight of darkness. There was no time to think, only to react, to fall back, to find cover in a world that no longer felt solid. Snow filled the air, turning smoke and dust into something strangely beautiful, strangely unreal. The forest that had been so silent now roared like the sea, each sound blending into the next until everything became one endless wave. The men moved not by command, but by instinct, drawn by survival more than strategy. Maps lost meaning, the land itself shifted under the pressure of movement. In that confusion, Bastogne became more than a town. It became a direction, a hope, a refuge whispered like a prayer. By midday, the roads west of Clairvaux and Wiltz were choked with movement. Convoys of jeeps and trucks, tanks and refugees, all tangled together in the narrow lanes of the Ardennes. Snow continued to fall, covering everything, wrecks, footprints, and fear. Men shouted for directions that no one could give, their voices fading into the hum of engines and the hiss of falling flakes. The offensive had struck like lightning, and the Allies were struggling to comprehend its scale. No one knew how far the Germans had advanced, only that they were everywhere at once. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead, and every sound carried the weight of uncertainty. Soldiers moved by instinct, following the faint echo of retreat toward the west, and amid the confusion, someone muttered again, the word that had begun to spread like wildfire, Bastogne, the place where they might hold the line. Through the fog and snow, the world seemed to dissolve into fragments. A field of white stretched endlessly, broken only by dark lines of trees and the fleeting flash of metal. The sound of engines rose and fell like breath, and the smell of oil and pine filled the frozen air. Somewhere, a church bell rang, faint, fragile, almost lost, as though trying to remind the world of something it had forgotten. The war moved past it, unstoppable, impersonal yet strangely beautiful in its vastness. The Ardennes became a landscape of ghosts and echoes, of men who disappeared into the mist before they could even be remembered. For the soldiers falling back toward Bastogne, the forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of frost and exhaustion. They clung to the hope that beyond the next ridge, beyond the next bend, they would find safety or order again. The sound of tank treads behind them became a constant pulse, a reminder that time itself was closing in. And through that haze of snow and sound, the legend of Bastogne began to take shape. Far behind the lines, Allied headquarters struggled to understand what was happening. Reports arrived in fragments, each more urgent than the last. Some spoke of small breakthroughs, others of entire divisions overrun. Maps were covered in red arrows that grew longer by the hour, bending westward toward the heart of Belgium. The generals spoke quietly, their words measured but heavy. They realized too late that the enemy had achieved surprise, complete, devastating surprise. It was a plan born of desperation, but executed with frightening precision. The calm of the Ardennes had been a mask, and now it had shattered. The question was no longer whether the Germans were attacking, but where they would stop. And in the middle of every conversation, one name kept surfacing, steady as a heartbeat: Bastogne. As the sun sank behind the hills, the snow glowed faintly blue, and the fog thickened once more. The battle was still unfolding, but already its shape was clear. A wave pushing west, relentless and cold. Along the ridges, stragglers gathered, their faces pale, their breath heavy in the dying light. They spoke in low tones, sharing what little they knew. Some had seen the armor columns, others had only heard them. All felt the same unshakable truth. Something vast was moving toward them, and they were not ready. In the fading light, the pines stood dark against the horizon, like sentinels watching history pass beneath their roots. The storm that had begun in secrecy now moved openly, devouring the calm of the winter front, and in the distance beyond the snow and confusion, a quiet town waited unknowingly for its destiny. As night fell over the Ardennes, the roads toward Bastogne filled with the echo of retreat, and in that echo, the call of the next chapter was already beginning to rise. The order came in the grey stillness before dawn. It was not shouted or celebrated, but spoken quietly, passed from one weary man to another, like a message written in frost. The 101st Airborne, resting in the rear, after months of battle, was to move again. Outside, freezing rain fell in steady sheets, coating helmets, weapons, and the bare branches of the trees. The men stirred from their tents, blinking through the chill, unsure if they were waking to another march or a dream of one. They were told the Germans had broken through, that a town called Bastogne was in danger. Few knew where it was, fewer still cared. What mattered was the tone in their officers' voices. Calm, certain, without hesitation, they began to pack in silence, each man finding comfort in the rhythm of routine. The war, it seemed, had called them back to the heart of winter. The rain turned to sleet as they loaded the trucks. Wheels spun in the mud. Engines growled against the cold, and breath hung thick in the air. Men wrapped their scarves tighter, their faces pale but steady beneath the dim light. They were veterans of Normandy and Holland, men who had jumped into darkness before and walked through chaos. Now they moved again, not by air but by road, through the frozen veins of Belgium. Their boots were soaked, their gloves stiff with ice, yet no one complained. The air smelled of wet earth and exhaust, of wool and smoke and determination. A few men laughed softly, not from joy, but from disbelief that they were once more heading toward the sound of trouble. The laughter faded quickly into the low hum of engines, and somewhere in that hum, the name Bastogne began to settle in their minds, like a quiet destination. Inside the trucks, they sat shoulder to shoulder, pressed close for warmth. The canvas flaps rattled in the wind, letting in gusts of cold air that bit at their faces. Some men smoked, others dozed with their heads against their packs. Conversation drifted in short, calm bursts, about home, about luck, about how long this one would last. Outside, the world slid past in shades of grey and white, the landscape stripped of colour by winter's hand. Trees leaned over the roads like guardians, their limbs heavy with snow. Villagers watched from doorways as the columns passed, faces half curious, half afraid. The men inside did not look back. They were already thinking of what lay ahead. Each mile carried them deeper into the cold, deeper into the waiting silence of the Ardennes. And as the trucks rolled on, the sound of the rain became their only companion. When they stopped for a short rest, the men stepped out into the slush, stretching their legs in the pale morning light. Steam rose from their breath and from the warm engines of the trucks. Somewhere nearby, a small fire crackled, forbidden but necessary. Around it, hands hovered in brief communion, palms open to the fragile warmth. The officers moved quietly among them, checking gear, offering nods instead of words. The air was filled with a kind of shared understanding, the knowledge that this journey would be hard, but that hardship was already familiar. A few men wrote quick notes home, short messages of reassurance that would arrive long after this day had passed. The rain softened again, falling in delicate threads that glistened on their helmets, and as they climbed back aboard, they carried the warmth of that small fire with them, tucked somewhere deep inside. The road ahead waited, endless and white. The convoy wound its way through narrow villages, their cobbled streets slick with ice. Children peered from behind shutters, their eyes wide with something between awe and sorrow. To them, the soldiers seemed carved from another world, figures of both hope and burden. The 101st moved with quiet discipline, each man lost in his own thoughts. They had no illusions about glory. They carried only the weight of duty, heavy but familiar. The war had taught them that heroism often looked like endurance. Their coats were torn, their boots worn thin, yet there was something unshakable in their posture, a calmness born not from certainty, but from acceptance. The trucks rattled onward, engines echoing off stone walls and into the woods beyond. The rain eased, turning the world into a soft blur of grey, blue and white. And through it all, the name Bastogne whispered forward like a promise. By afternoon the sleet turned again to snow. It fell in slow, steady flakes that clung to rifles and helmets, softening even the harshest lines. The men grew quieter still, lulled by the rhythm of the snowfall and the hum of tires on frozen ground. Some began to hum songs under their breath, old tunes from home, carried softly through the cold air. The sound was gentle, almost reverent, like a prayer for warmth. They did not know exactly where they were, only that each turn of the road brought them closer to something waiting beyond sight. The officers spoke in low tones, words lost beneath the steady sweep of wind. Every man listened inwardly, measuring his strength, his fear, his purpose. The world around them had narrowed to the sound of snow against canvas, and the thrum of motion beneath their feet. And in that narrowness peace and dread lived side by side, quietly entwined. As night fell, they halted once more. This time in a field that glowed faintly under moonlight. Fires were forbidden again. And so the men sat in darkness, their outlines blurred by drifting flakes. The cold pressed close, patient and unrelenting. They spoke little, conserving warmth and breath alike. Somewhere an officer read the final orders. They would reach Bastogne by morning, and there they would hold. The words hung in the air, calm and absolute, like a stone dropped into still water. No one asked how long they would stay, or what they would face. The answers did not matter. The resolve already existed. Around them the wind sighed through the trees, like a slow hymn, and in that sound they found a kind of quiet strength that would follow them through what came next. Before dawn they were moving again, their wheels crunching through ice, their breath forming clouds in the half-light. The stars had faded, replaced by a dull silver glow on the horizon. The forest loomed ahead, dark and deep, its pines standing like watchful sentinels. Somewhere within those woods lay the small town they had been sent to defend, though none yet knew what fate awaited them. There the road curved endlessly forward, leading them into the heart of the storm that was already forming beyond sight. But there was no fear now, only a quiet acceptance, the steady rhythm of hearts and engines in unison. The cold had become a companion rather than an enemy. The journey itself had become its own meditation. And as the first light touched the tops of the trees, the men of the 101st Airborne moved toward Bastogne, toward the place where endurance would find its truest form. And with that slow approach through snow and silence, the road to Bastogne began to reveal the weight of what it meant to hold a line. The convoy moved slowly, its wheels grinding over ice-crusted roads that refused to yield under the weight of men and machines. Snow mixed with mud, turning each mile into a small, stubborn trial of patience. The air smelled of wet wool and exhaust, sharp and biting, while the fog hung thick among the trees like a curtain. Soldiers leaned forward, hands on the wheel or rifle, listening to the low, steady hum of engines and the soft, hollow crunch of tires on frozen earth. The world outside the trucks passed in grey blurs, villages and fields indistinct under a veil of winter. Some towns were already empty, doors bolted against fear, smoke from chimneys curling faintly into the cold sky. Others still held life, small movements behind shutters, shadows of families waiting for a moment that might never come. The road stretched endlessly, each turn seeming both familiar and new, carrying the men toward a destiny they could not yet see. Inside the vehicles, quiet conversations murmured like soft music, fragments of memories shared between long hours, and through it all, the rhythm of motion became a meditation, steady and unwavering, guiding them forward. The villagers who remained fled as best they could, carrying what they could salvage through the snow. Old women with scarves wrapped tightly, children clutching small bundles, men leading carts that creaked and groaned under their burdens. The pace was slow, each step deliberate and measured, yet urgency was never far beneath the surface. Soldiers watched with quiet concern, offering nods and gestures of reassurance, though words were often unnecessary. The smell of wood smoke mixed with mud and frost, a strange comfort in the disjointed world of winter travel. Horses stumbled through icy ruts, carts sliding over frozen ridges, yet the rhythm never stopped. Somewhere a bell rang faintly, announcing the hour or perhaps only marking the persistence of life. The villagers moved in slow, deliberate harmony with the convoy, their bodies and hearts carried along by the same momentum, and in their retreat there was an unspoken understanding that all of them were bound together by the snow, the cold and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The road, both physical and metaphorical, seemed endless, yet it had to be followed. General Anthony McAuliffe sat quietly in his command car, his hands folded in his lap as the convoy pushed forward. He did not speak loudly, he did not gesture with urgency. His calmness was deliberate, a steady presence amid the slow chaos of movement. The men around him felt the reassurance, subtle and unwavering, as though the confidence of one mind could steady the rhythm of many. He reviewed maps and reports in silence, noting every ridge, every road, every potential crossing. Though the rain and snow blurred the lines, his mind traced them with clarity and patience. His leadership was not flashy or boisterous. It was quiet, contemplative, almost meditative, and yet it grounded those who followed him. Orders were given softly, carried along the convoy like a thread through a tapestry of frost and engine hum. The snow fell gently outside, blanketing the world in white, and for a moment even the uncertainty of war seemed distant. And beneath that calm authority, the convoy pressed forward, steady as a heartbeat. As afternoon wore on, the landscape became a study in muted contrast. Fields stretched pale under the weight of snow, interrupted by dark patches of forest, and the occasional village roof peeking through frost. The men trudged forward through the grey light, listening to the wind sigh through skeletal branches, counting the miles in silence. Each hill brought a brief rise in the tire's struggle, a subtle vibration beneath the feet, and a soft rhythm that kept the march moving. Conversations had thinned, replaced by reflection, memory, and the occasional whispered observation of the world passing too quickly to notice. The towns emptied of life, held the echo of footsteps, and the distant creak of wagons, resonating faintly against frozen walls. The convoy was both alone and part of a greater whole, moving as though the snow itself guided them. Each soldier carried exhaustion, hope, and patience in equal measure. And as the sun sank low, the pale light softened the edges of the world, turning the road ahead into a ribbon of silver stretching toward an uncertain horizon. The journey continued, slow, deliberate, and unbroken. Occasionally, the men stopped for brief respite, stepping out into the wind that cut sharply against their faces. Frost clung to eyebrows and eyelashes, and gloves stiffened into brittle shells. Steam rose from boots and collars, mingling with the cold breath of the air into a delicate, transient haze. Some soldiers closed their eyes for a moment, drawing the warmth from their bodies inward, savoring the stillness before motion resumed. Others checked weapons and packs, methodically ensuring that every strap and strap buckle was secure. There were no words of complaint, only the soft acknowledgement of endurance and routine. Each step, each motion became a meditation, a quiet ritual performed beneath the indifferent sky. Even the sound of distant wind felt purposeful, a soft rhythm to accompany the trudging convoy. And as they climbed back into the trucks, the journey resumed, steady and inevitable. The road stretched forward, white and quiet, carrying them closer to the unknown that awaited at Bastogne. The villages through which they passed offered brief glimpses of what had been normal life. Horses pawed at the ground, small birds moved nervously in the branches, smoke drifted from hidden chimneys, windows reflected pale daylight, showing only empty streets and frozen gardens. Each stop, each glimpse, reminded the men of what they were leaving behind and what they were moving toward. The rhythm of tires, the hum of engines, and the occasional murmur of voices were all that anchored them in the present. The snow fell more steadily now, muffling the world outside into a soft, uniform grey. Yet beneath that softness there was momentum, a quiet inevitability that pushed them forward. Every mile passed beneath the weight of history, their bodies and minds moving in tandem with the unseen pull of duty. And somewhere in that silence, the name Bastogne began to grow heavier, whispered from one to another like a fragile promise. The destination became less a point on a map, and more a thought, a goal carried in the mind's eye. Evening arrived with muted light, stretching shadows across the icy fields. The trucks slowed, wheels spinning in deep patches of snow, and the men leaned into the cold as they pressed onward. Conversation was nearly gone now, replaced by rhythmic breathing and the soft, steady hum of engines. The forest around them seemed endless, each ridge and bend merging with the next. There were moments when the world seemed suspended in a fragile balance, neither moving nor still. In those moments the men felt a quiet unity, a shared patience born from long practice and collective endurance. Every mile was measured not in distance but in persistence, each one a step toward something larger than themselves. General McAuliffe's presence was felt without words, a silent guidance threading through every movement, and as the pale light dimmed further, the convoy continued, tire tracks weaving a slow, steady rhythm into the snow. Bastogne lay ahead, distant but inevitable, waiting silently in the whiteness. By nightfall, the road became a line of dark shapes against the snow, stretching toward the horizon like a quiet river of motion. The men inside each truck leaned back, eyes heavy, breathing slow, their hands still warm from the engine's heat. Frost gathered on their coats, glinting faintly in the silver glow of moonlight. Conversations were sparse, gentle, drifting toward memories of home or the soft rhythm of prayer. Even the wind seemed to respect their quiet brushing past without interruption. They could sense that the forest around them was older than the war, older than the men, holding every sound and motion in patient memory. The trucks moved like slow tides, carrying their cargo steadily toward destiny. The journey had become a meditation, a careful, deliberate unfolding of time in snow and silence. and with every mile, the name Bastogne grew in weight and clarity, whispered softly among the men who would soon make it their stand. And in the stillness of that winter night, the road carried them onward, each movement a quiet step toward what they were born to hold. The town of Bastogne lay quiet beneath a thick blanket of snow, its streets narrow and hushed as if holding their breath. Around it the German columns moved with silent precision, closing a ring that transformed the town into an island. The frozen landscape seemed endless, yet every ridge, every tree line, became a boundary, a line beyond which the world had been cut away. Soldiers inside the town watched the horizon, listening to distant murmurs carried faintly through wind and snow. Maps were spread across tables, candles flickering, highlighting lines and arrows that converged on their position. Every point marked a reality they could scarcely believe: roads blocked, supply lines severed, escape impossible. Yet the people of Bastogne did not despair. They moved with quiet purpose, checking their positions, reinforcing barricades, sharing wordless glances that carried more reassurance than speech. The snow outside softened the sharp edges of fear, lending it a muted, almost distant quality, and in that muted fear, a determination began to take root, steady and slow, like the first frost on a window pane. Whispers circulated through the town's narrow alleys and makeshift headquarters. Soldiers spoke softly of units lost, of columns seen in the distance, of towns abandoned to the snow. Civilians huddled in basements and attics, listening to the cadence of heavy boots echoing faintly in the cold streets. Some spoke of disbelief, others of stoic acceptance. The sense of isolation was absolute. The town held tightly by forces beyond its control, yet not yet touched in full. Snow drifted in through cracks and chimneys, settling silently on roofs, on rifles, on the worn faces of those who stood watch. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying the quiet across empty courtyards and frozen roads. Every breath inside the town felt heavier, laden with the weight of both survival and hope. And as night fell, the glow of fires within Bastogne became small islands of warmth in a vast white emptiness. The encirclement was complete, yet life persisted within the fragile heart of the town. General McAuliffe moved through Bastogne with quiet certainty, a calm presence in a world suddenly constrained. He did not rush or gesture, but spoke in measured tones, each word deliberate, almost meditative. Officers gathered around tables, studying maps that traced every road, ridge, and forest path surrounding the town. Each line on the paper carried the weight of decision, the weight of faith in men who had never known surrender. The snow outside hid much of the enemy's movement, yet it also revealed the impossibility of retreat. Messages arrived sporadically, fragmented, carried by runners whose paths were dangerous and slow. Even so, McAuliffe's presence steadied those around him, quieting fear and clarifying purpose. His calm became a rhythm, echoing softly in the hearts of the soldiers, reminding them that duty could be a meditation even in the midst of crisis. And under that rhythm, Bastogne began to understand its new form. Isolated, enclosed, yet still alive. Each heartbeat, each movement, stitched the town together in preparation for what lay ahead. The snow continued to fall in steady layers, softening the world outside Bastogne's walls. The distant hum of engines reminded the men inside that the ring tightened with every hour. Trees, fences, and ridges became markers of control, their positions mapped and remembered like sacred geometry. Soldiers patrolled quietly, listening to the wind, the faint shuffle of boots, the occasional whisper from the hills beyond. Civilians watched from shuttered windows, aware of the impossibility of movement, yet comforted by the rhythm of daily life continuing. Fires burned in chimneys, their smoke curling upward into the whiteness, signaling resilience rather than panic. Every routine task, distributing rations, checking defenses, tending to the wounded, became a quiet affirmation of purpose. The world beyond the town seemed vast, cold, and unyielding, yet the town's heartbeat remained steady and deliberate, and through the soft murmur of snow and wind, a quiet understanding formed. Bastogne was an island of determination in a sea of uncertainty. The encirclement had given shape to both challenge and resolve. In the narrow streets, men whispered stories of other towns and battles, of retreats and advances, but always returned to the present. They spoke softly of Bastogne itself, repeating its name like a prayer, a promise, a destination not to be abandoned. Children, hidden away from windows, listened to the cadence of voices, sensing tension without knowing its full shape. Snowflakes drifted into the town, landing lightly on rooftops, turning the walls into a soft white frame around determined faces. Each alley, each courtyard, held quiet activity. The careful arrangement of supplies, the sharpening of tools, the slow pace of preparation. No one spoke of panic. There was only measured attention, a calm that carried each person through the long hours. The weight of isolation was shared in silence, heavy but steady. Outside, the enemy's presence was a quiet pressure, invisible yet undeniable. And as the evening deepened, the town held itself together, each heartbeat a reminder that faith could shape endurance. Bastogne, wrapped in snow and quiet, was becoming more than a town. It was a statement of resolve. Through the night, signals passed along the perimeter, faint but steady. Scouts moved like shadows across frozen fields, returning with reports whispered in the dark. Officers gathered in small groups, exchanging information with hushed urgency, consulting maps and charts that traced the invisible fingers of encirclement. Each line, each road, each ridge carried both risk and opportunity, the weight of choices that could not be delayed. Snow fell continuously, softening the harsh edges of the town, while concealing the movements beyond. Soldiers inside listened to the wind, interpreting its rhythm like a language, noting when it shifted and when it held steady. The townspeople adapted to the cadence, allowing it to guide their own routines, their own small rituals of comfort. And in the quiet, a strange harmony formed between isolation and vigilance, a coexistence that turned fear into patient readiness. Bastogne existed in its own rhythm now, enclosed yet unbroken. The ring tightened, but so did the unity within. Morning arrived pale and silver, light refracted by snow and mist. The outlines of surrounding hills and ridges emerged faintly, revealing the geometry of the encirclement that had been forming in silence. Every approach road, every minor pathway, was under observation, and the soldiers adjusted accordingly, moving with deliberate calm. Rations were shared, weapons checked, and positions reinforced, all performed with quiet precision. General McAuliffe moved among them, his presence a grounding force, reminding all that calm and attention were themselves acts of strength. The townspeople carried out small tasks, tending fires, distributing food, and offering quiet encouragement. Each person became a link in the chain of endurance, a thread connecting the town's present to the uncertain future. The snow continued to fall, softening edges and concealing movement, as if the world itself were holding its breath. And in that silence, Bastogne remained steady, an island not of fear, but of quiet, deliberate faith. The encirclement was complete, yet the heart of the town pulsed with determination. By afternoon, the full scope of isolation was clear. Reports confirmed that no reinforcements could arrive immediately, and all surrounding roads were blocked by ice, snow, and enemy forces. The town had become both fortress and sanctuary, each building a small bastion of human resilience. Soldiers and civilians alike accepted this reality with calm determination, moving through routines as if the day itself were a meditation. Snow fell in a soft, steady rhythm, muffling the distant world and lending focus to the life within the town. Messages were delivered slowly, carried by runners who moved carefully through frost and shadow. Every door, every window, every makeshift barricade was a statement of presence and purpose. Even in isolation, there was quiet solidarity, a shared rhythm of preparation, vigilance, and quiet hope. And as night fell once more over the snow-laden streets, Bastogne stood enclosed yet unbowed, its spirit a gentle pulse against the vast, indifferent winter. And beneath the quiet snowfall, the town listened to itself, preparing patiently for the trials yet to come. The morning air was sharp and still, tinged with frost that clung to every branch and rooftop. Soldiers emerged from their shelters to find the earth stubborn beneath their boots, frozen solid beneath a thin layer of snow. Shovels struck the ground with a muted clang, the sound soft against the hush of the winter world. Men dug with steady patience, forming foxholes that would become both protection and sanctuary. Their hands numbed against steel and cold, their breaths rising in visible plumes that mingled with the soft swirl of falling snow. Somewhere nearby, the faint echo of distant movement hinted at the enemy's proximity, though the forest kept most of it concealed. Medics in tents moved quietly, preparing for what might come, their calm efficiency, a rhythm that reassured others. The town itself held its breath, waiting for the first stirrings of the siege to touch its streets. And in that quiet a strange balance formed, between motion and stillness, between anticipation and the slow, deliberate rhythm of preparation. Each man carried himself carefully, knowing the world outside was already shifting around them. Snow continued to fall, settling softly on rifles and helmets, masking footprints and muffling sound. Along the perimeter, sentries moved in careful steps, listening for changes in the air or subtle vibrations across frozen earth. Their eyes scanned the whiteness, seeking the first hints of intrusion, yet finding only gentle, deceptive calm. The earth resisted their tools as they dug, making every hole a small act of persistence. Shovels rang against ice and rock, filling the air with a cadence that became a quiet meditation. Inside makeshift shelters, others checked bandages, boiled water, and shared wordless encouragement. The stillness of the town felt expansive, a soft silence punctuated only by movement and occasional wind. And then, as if the snow itself had whispered permission, the first signs of contact appeared along the edges of the forest. It was subtle, barely more than a shadow, yet enough to make the heart quicken. Bastogne was no longer waiting, the siege had begun. Foxholes became small sanctuaries, spaces where soldiers crouched against the frozen soil, their bodies pressed low, their breath steady. They whispered to one another softly, sharing maps, instructions, or quiet reassurances. Outside, snow drifted into every crevice, coating equipment in a muted glow of white. The world seemed slowed by cold, each motion deliberate, each step measured. The sound of distant engines and muffled voices reached them like echoes through glass, faint but persistent. Medics moved among the soldiers with quiet grace, tending minor injuries, offering warmth and soft words of care. Every action, though small, was magnified by the stillness, creating a rhythm that held the men steady. Even as the enemy's presence became more perceptible, the soldiers remained calm, rooted in purpose and routine. The siege was becoming both a test and a meditation, a slow unfolding of endurance, and through it all, the snow continued to fall, softening the harsh outlines of fear. Along the northern edge, the first real skirmishes began, subtle shifts in the white landscape. Men moved with careful precision, their actions deliberate and almost silent. The sound of metal against frost punctuated the quiet, each noise carrying weight far beyond its size. Medics prepared quietly in their tents, checking bandages, readying stretchers, yet the air was not thick with panic, only gentle urgency. Soldiers dug deeper into the frozen ground, their movements rhythmic, almost hypnotic in their repetition. Snowflakes collected on brows, eyelashes, and coats, creating a fragile layer of calm beauty over the struggle below. The townspeople watched cautiously from behind walls and shutters, sensing change in the air, yet grounded by the slow rhythm of life continuing. Even in these first encounters, there was no rush, no frantic chaos, only measured action amid steady observation. And as the day unfolded, Bastogne began to feel both small and vast, isolated yet alive. The siege had begun, gentle and relentless, like snow accumulating on a quiet forest floor. The medic tents filled slowly as minor injuries arrived, quiet expressions of the first exchanges with the enemy. There was no shouting, only the soft rustle of canvas, the careful adjustment of bandages, the murmured words of comfort. Soldiers moved past in deliberate steps, their faces calm but alert, aware of what each moment might demand. Outside, foxholes deepened, their walls reinforced with frozen earth and snow. Every action was methodical, performed in a rhythm that mirrored the snowfall and the hum of distant engines. Even as reports of contact drifted in from the perimeter, the town maintained a steady pulse, neither rushed nor panicked. The white landscape around Bastogne seemed to absorb the tension, creating a quiet lens through which the men and civilians observed one another and themselves. And in that absorption, the siege revealed its first lesson. Endurance is forged in subtle, repeated gestures, in moments both small and essential. Snow and ice pressed close, shaping every movement into careful meditation. The day carried on in quiet motion, as if the town itself were holding its breath alongside its defenders. In the afternoon, frost began to soften under a pale sun, revealing the faint outlines of tracks, the first marks of struggle in snow-laden fields. Soldiers observed them, noting patterns and changes with quiet attention. The air carried a muted hum of motion from distant troops, a reminder that the world beyond Bastogne had not paused. Yet within the town, life unfolded in measured rhythm, supplies distributed, positions checked, and warmth shared in small gestures. Each foxhole, each prepared position was a statement of calm persistence, a ritual repeated across frozen ground. Medics moved silently, tending to the men with gentle hands, steadying nerves more than bodies. The snow fell softly still, each flake a quiet witness to preparation and endurance. Soldiers whispered names and observations, their voices barely audible above the gentle sweep of wind. And as shadows lengthened across the white fields, Bastogne began to feel the first weight of isolation, yet remained steady, contained, and quietly determined. The siege stretched ahead, infinite in patience, and quiet in its power. Evening came with a soft silver glow that muted all edges of the town. Soldiers huddled into foxholes, their breath forming clouds that mingled with the snow-laden air. The hum of activity was calm yet persistent, a subtle rhythm that carried the town into night. Medics continued their work by candlelight, the small flames reflected in the frozen frost, lending warmth to the quiet. The perimeter remained tense, the first clashes leaving traces of sound, yet nothing erupted beyond the measured soft exchanges of movement. Inside, men shared quiet words, maintaining routine and purpose in the face of growing pressure. The snow continued to accumulate, muffling distant noises, creating a sense of suspended time. The first day of conflict had passed in both motion and stillness, shaping the town and its defenders into a rhythm of endurance. And as night deepened, the foxholes, the tents, and the quiet streets became sanctuaries of patience and preparation. Bastogne waited steady and calm beneath the first snowfall of its long siege. By midnight, the town was quiet again, snow settling like a soft veil over rooftops and roads. The gentle sounds of shovels, boots, and whispered instructions continued in measured rhythm, echoing the day's pattern. Soldiers rested where they could, warm enough to survive, but aware of the world just beyond sight. Medics checked their spaces once more, preparing for whatever the coming hours might bring. Outside, the wind swept across the frozen fields, carrying distant sounds that hinted at both movement and stillness. Each man felt the weight of isolation, yet carried it with calm resolve, rooted in duty and rhythm. The snow, thickening under moonlight, softened edges and erased the harsh clarity of distance. Bastogne existed now as both refuge and front, a small island of life within a vast winter landscape. And through the quiet night, the siege continued, eternal and soft, shaping patience as much as it tested endurance. And in the hush of snow and foxhole, the first day of Bastogne's trial settled like frost, slow and unbroken, carrying the town gently toward what was to come. Beneath the snow-laden rooftops of Bastogne, families gathered in cellars and quiet rooms, seeking warmth and solace. The wind pressed against shutters, carrying distant sounds that hinted at movement and tension. Yet inside the walls, time slowed. Children huddled close to parents, small hands clasped in gentle prayer, voices soft and rhythmic. The smell of wood smoke mixed with the damp earth of the cellars, grounding them in a fragile sense of normalcy. Some families whispered stories to pass the hours, tales of spring gardens or distant holidays, a contrast to the grey light outside. The soldiers above maintained their careful watch, and the rhythm of human life beneath the town continued quietly. Every breath, every shuffle of a foot on wooden floors, became part of the town's steady heartbeat. Even in fear, there was a meditation in movement, a gentle routine that offered control, and in that gentle routine, the civilians found quiet strength, a resilience that would carry them through the hours ahead. Bastogne, though encircled and tense, cradled life beneath its snow-coated streets. Outside, the snow drifted softly into streets emptied of hustle, turning roads into soft ribbons of white. Windows reflected pale daylight, hinting at the calm that endured even as the siege tightened. Children listened to distant noises, their ears attuned to the whisper of boots, or the murmur of the wind across the rooftops. Parents whispered assurances, steadying hearts more than bodies, offering warmth in words and gestures. The cellar walls seemed to absorb sound, transforming fear into a slow rhythm of patience. Fires flickered in hidden hearths, casting faint glows that danced across tired faces. Water boiled softly on stoves, scenting the air with the smell of warmth and sustenance. Even in isolation, the rhythm of domestic life created a quiet counterpoint to the tense world beyond. And as shadows lengthened against the pale snow, families tucked closer together, each heartbeat a quiet act of resilience. Bastogne's civilians existed within the rhythm of snow, wind, and whispered reassurance. The children, curious yet careful, traced patterns in frost-covered windows, watching the world muted by snow. Their laughter was soft, tentative, an echo of normality in the hush of winter. Occasionally, distant sounds reminded them that the world outside was alive and shifting. Yet even then, Their prayers returned, whispered with rhythm and care, offering comfort to themselves and those around them. Mothers and fathers moved in slow, deliberate gestures, preparing food or arranging blankets, each motion an anchor in uncertainty. The cellar's earth floor pressed cold beneath small feet, yet warmth traveled through bodies close together. Shadows of parents' hands crossed walls, shaping stories and quiet reassurance. The air smelled faintly of smoke, bread, and damp wool, grounding each moment in sensory familiarity. And with every gentle breath, the children learned a lesson in patience, in quiet endurance, in the subtle strength of being present. Bastogne's streets above held tension, but below life found its rhythm. Elderly residents moved carefully along narrow passageways, carrying supplies and water, their movements slow but assured. Each gesture was deliberate, a measure of care learned over decades. The snow outside made the town seem smaller, softened the edges of fear, and lent a stillness that both comforted and reminded them of fragility. Conversations were hushed, voices carrying memories as well as instructions, sharing wisdom with those who would listen. Even pets moved in quiet obedience, sniffing and pacing, as though attuned to the rhythm of human endurance. The cellar became a sanctuary, a womb of warmth and routine against the vast, indifferent winter beyond. Each person contributed to a silent choreography of survival, small acts stitched together into a shared pattern. The distant hum of the siege above was present, yet softened by the insulating walls and snow-laden roofs. And in the gentle sway of the household, fear became tempered by the meditation of daily care. Bastogne's civilians lived quietly, their resilience woven into every breath and step. Meals were prepared with care, measured portions stretched across families, a slow ritual of sustenance. Children helped in small ways, carrying water or arranging firewood, learning rhythm through repetition. The taste of bread, the warmth of soup, and the smell of boiling water became markers of continuity. Conversations drifted between caution and memory, a gentle balance of awareness and calm. Candles flickered against walls, shadows dancing softly, offering light without urgency. The snow outside softened further, muffling distant movement and transforming streets into silent corridors of white. Every task, though small, reinforced a sense of agency, a quiet counterbalance to the siege's weight. The town above hummed with tense vigilance, yet below, life persisted in a slower, deliberate tempo. And through these hours, civilians found an inner cadence, a rhythm of calm amidst uncertainty. Bastogne's winter was harsh, but life carried on gently, insistently, quietly. At night, families huddled under blankets, listening to the faint creak of shutters or the distant echo of boots. Their breaths formed soft clouds in the cold air, moving in sync with the hushed rhythm of the cellar. Prayers returned, low and measured, blending with whispers of stories and lullabies. The snow outside continued its quiet descent, layering over streets and rooftops, smoothing the harshness of isolation. In these hours, the town became a meditation in resilience, a quiet unfolding of patience and care. Every whispered reassurance, every gentle touch became a small anchor against uncertainty. Even fatigue became part of the rhythm, as eyelids drooped and bodies relaxed into careful sleep. Outside, the siege pressed onward, relentless yet softened by the falling snow. And within each family, the heartbeat of Bastogne persisted, steady and calm, carrying them through the night. The civilians' winter was quiet, yet unbroken, an enduring pulse beneath the tension of encirclement. Morning light filtered through frost-laced windows, pale and silver, casting gentle patterns on the cellar walls. Families rose slowly, moving in soft, deliberate motions, careful not to disturb the fragile calm. The smell of warm bread and tea filled the air, anchoring them to the present. Children played quietly, tracing patterns in flour or paper, finding rhythm in small gestures. Adults checked fires and water, maintaining the slow meditation of routine. Outside, the snow muted every sound, lending a hushed quality to distant activity and movement. The siege above continued, but below life found measured continuity in its repetition. Every step, every breath, became a quiet assertion of presence and endurance. And in that morning light, Bastogne's people carried forward, unhurried, steady, attentive to the small enduring rhythms of existence. Their resilience was quiet, woven into the heartbeat of a town held fast by snow and patience. By afternoon, the town above had settled into a rhythm of vigilance, and the civilians followed their own steady cadence below. Small tasks repeated like gentle waves, sweeping boiling water, arranging blankets, sharing warm gestures. Conversations flowed softly, an undercurrent of observation and care beneath the hum of preparation. Children whispered stories to one another, laughter, quiet, measured, blending with the distant sound of snow drifting against the streets. Parents guided their motions, their touch firm yet calm, teaching subtle lessons of patience and attention. Frost on windows reflected muted light, softening walls and corners of the cellar. The air carried the scent of bread, smoke, and wool, linking body and mind to familiar rhythms. Even in isolation, the town remained alive, its heartbeat synchronized with the small, deliberate motions of its people. And as evening approached, the snow continued to fall, gentle and persistent, folding the world in quiet white. Bastogne's civilians endured, their lives a meditation of calm and subtle courage beneath the siege above. The 101st Airborne spread across the snowy perimeter, each outpost a small thread in a fragile web of defense. Foy, Noville, and Marvy became more than names on a map. They were whispered fragments of steadfastness, points of quiet defiance against the encroaching cold and silence. Soldiers moved carefully between positions, their steps deliberate on icy paths, listening to the wind as though it carried messages from the enemy. Each foxhole, each barricade, became a meditation in motion, a slow affirmation of presence. The snow softened footsteps and muffled distant sounds, making every movement deliberate and measured. Communications were sparse, shared in hushed tones, yet each message carried weight and clarity. Men checked one another's gear, adjusted straps and rifles, and shared nods of reassurance. Even as the distance between posts stretched thin, the rhythm of duty bound the soldiers together in quiet, deliberate motion, and with every breath in the icy air, the outposts became small islands of persistence, holding the line with silent resolve. Bastogne's perimeter was both fragile and enduring, stitched together by the quiet heartbeat of those who remained. Foy held its place like a single note in a vast symphony, a reminder that every position mattered. Soldiers adjusted their stances in snow-dusted trenches, scanning distant ridges and tree lines with calm attention. Reports arrived sporadically, each one carrying subtle shifts in understanding. A ridge occupied, a path blocked, a road watched. The wind carried these pieces of information softly, weaving them into the rhythm of the day. Men worked quietly, reinforcing positions with small gestures, a shovel here, a log there, a careful movement that became part of a shared meditation. Even under tension, the frost-scented air seemed to encourage patience, a soft accompaniment to alert minds. The villagers beyond the lines remained sheltered, unaware of the subtle choreography unfolding in their fields, and in that quiet Foy became more than a location. It became a quiet testament to attention, endurance, and deliberate care. Each movement was a measured response, a meditation in vigilance. The day stretched forward gently, each hour stitched to the next in purpose and patience. Neuville offered another note in the tapestry of defense, a small ridge where presence itself was the strongest statement. Men crouched low, snow pressing against coats and boots, listening to the wind sweep through bare trees. The foxholes dug into frozen earth felt permanent in their slow shaping, yet fragile in their thin walls. Reports of movement beyond the horizon were shared softly, each word carrying the weight of both caution and knowledge. Soldiers exchanged nods and gestures, quiet affirmations of shared responsibility. The distant village seemed suspended in the snow, unaware of the careful choreography on its outskirts. Even as the frost nipped fingers and faces, the rhythm of duty persisted, deliberate and unhurried. Every breath, every subtle adjustment of gear or stance became a gentle exercise in mindfulness. And through that meditation of presence, Neuville held its space, a quiet fragment of defiance in the still white world. Bastogne's ring grew tighter, yet each point of resistance carried weight and meaning. Marvy lay farther along the perimeter, a distant yet essential pulse in the town's heartbeat. Soldiers moved with care along the icy paths, their eyes tracing tree lines and snowdrifts, alert to subtle changes in the landscape. Each movement was precise, measured, a small contribution to the whole of the defense. The wind and snow softened the edges of threat, yet amplified attention, creating a rhythm that combined patience with vigilance. Men reinforced positions with hands and tools, shaping snow and earth into protective forms. Even as fatigue pressed against bodies, the quiet focus of duty carried them onward. Messages delivered with soft urgency threaded the posts together, linking small points of resistance into a cohesive whole. And in that connectivity, Marvy became a symbol, not of power, but of deliberate presence and persistent attention. Each soldier understood that endurance was woven from small, consistent gestures. The outpost, quiet and steady, held the line with patience and care. Throughout the perimeter, each position echoed the others, a pattern of calm awareness against encroaching isolation. Soldiers shared small comforts, a whispered word, a warm gesture, a moment of acknowledgement, grounding each other in the rhythm of survival. The snow muted sound, yet accentuated presence. Every breath and step deliberate and significant. Maps and notes passed along quietly, the soft rustle of paper marking the subtle pulse of strategy. Every ridge and alley became both boundary and guide, shaping how men moved and responded. Even as the siege pressed in from all sides, the perimeter maintained a quiet order, a careful choreography of stillness and action. And in the shared awareness, the soldiers found resilience, a slow unfolding of strength beneath the weight of snow and sky. Bastogne's names, Foy, Neuville, Marvy, became anchors, whispered reminders of persistence and purpose. Each outpost was a fragment of defiance, small yet significant in the vast, muted landscape. And as night fell, the town's heartbeat continued, quiet, steady, and deliberate. The snow deepened, softening edges, shaping every footstep and movement with subtle insistence. Soldiers in foxholes checked weapons and positions, their gestures deliberate and careful. Reports trickled in, relayed in quiet tones, each one folding into the day's rhythm. The distant trees seemed to lean toward the town, listening, yet the perimeter held patient and attentive. Men shared sparse words, maintaining presence through both action and stillness. Even fatigue became part of the cadence, a gentle reminder to rest without abandoning purpose. Bastogne itself seemed to breathe beneath the quiet night. the town's rhythm synchronized with the meticulous attention of those who guarded it. And in that synchronization, the outposts became legends, their names carrying meaning beyond the map. Every ridge, every snow-covered street, every whispered acknowledgement strengthened the fragile, persistent line. The town endured, steady and calm beneath the white and quiet night. By early morning, frost-laden air settled into quiet clarity, revealing the perimeter's rhythm and reach. Soldiers shifted subtly, maintaining vigilance while conserving strength, their motions soft yet deliberate. Snow muffled distant activity, yet every subtle change was noted, every sound interpreted carefully. Even as the cold pressed against boots and gloves, men continued the meditative cycle of presence, observation, and reassurance. Messages moved along the line like whispered threads, binding Foy, Noville, and Marvy together in quiet solidarity. The wind swept gently through trees and ridges, a soft accompaniment to the heartbeat of the perimeter. Each outpost became a fragment of purpose, a deliberate affirmation of endurance in a world softened by snow. And through this steady rhythm, the soldiers of the 101st held their ground, their patience shaping the town's defiance. Bastogne was not yet broken, not yet bowed, but quietly persistent. The line held, and with it, the heartbeat of a town waiting for the day to unfold. By afternoon, the rhythm of the perimeter had become second nature. A quiet choreography of presence and vigilance. Men moved softly through snow-laden paths, shifting positions and checking equipment with measured attention. Each outpost whispered its significance, every ridge and lane a story of patience and resilience. Soldiers shared warmth and small gestures, reinforcing the subtle bond that carried endurance through long hours. The snow continued to fall gently, shaping sound and space, turning the world into a soft white expanse. Reports passed along the line, each one a fragment of understanding, quietly stitched into strategy. Even fatigue was integrated into the rhythm, a gentle ebb in the persistent tide of observation and care. And as evening approached, Bastogne's defenders remained steadfast, each name and position a fragment of defiance carved into the winter landscape. The town endured, stitched together by small deliberate acts that resonated far beyond their scale. And through the soft drift of snow and the steady pulse of the perimeter, Bastogne held the line, patient, calm, and unwavering. Snow drifted across Bastogne like a slow-moving tide, settling on rooftops, trees, and rifles alike, softening edges and muffling sound. The air was crisp and still, each breath forming tiny clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Soldiers huddled in foxholes or tents, their bodies pressed against wool blankets, sharing warmth in silence. Frost crept across exposed skin, a quiet, persistent reminder of nature's presence and power. Rations were small and deliberate, each bite of bread or sip of water measured and savored. Amid the cold, men wrote letters home, their hands trembling slightly as ink met paper. Words became lifelines, carrying reassurance and longing across frozen landscapes to unseen loved ones. The rhythm of writing, of shaping sentences carefully, mirrored the slow passage of time in the snow-covered town. Even the simplest phrases took on weight, turning quiet moments into acts of endurance. And as the pen moved across the page, the soldiers' hearts carried warmth into the stillness of winter. Frostbite whispered at fingertips and toes, subtle at first, then persistent, a gentle intrusion into daily life. Each touch of cold was met with careful attention. Gloves adjusted, socks shifted, boots tightened against icy ground. The snow, though soft and beautiful, became a quiet adversary, challenging endurance without malice, only presence. Soldiers shared small comforts, a cup of lukewarm tea, a woolen scarf, a whispered word of reassurance. Outside, the wind swept the streets in continuous motion, carrying snowflakes that brushed lightly against faces and coats. Letters remained a tether to home, carefully folded and stowed, carried in pockets close to the heart. Each word written was deliberate, a measured offering of connection and hope. Even the act of writing became a meditation, slowing time and steadying the mind. The town lay hushed beneath snow-laden roofs, a world both fragile and persistent. And through this delicate endurance, life moved slowly forward, anchored by thought, memory, and reflection. Hungry hands pressed against rationed food, yet the act of sharing made each meal gentle and sustaining. Conversation was low, measured, comforting in its rhythm and repetition. Snow muffled distant sounds, softening movement and lending space for contemplation. Soldiers traced lines on maps with cold fingers, planning quietly, speaking softly, aware of both risk and patience. Every movement, every adjustment of clothing or gear, became a ritual of survival, a slow and deliberate meditation. The letters continued to flow, some filled with mundane observations, others carrying longing or humor, each shaping the inner landscape of those writing and those receiving. Even in silence, presence was shared, a steady heartbeat under the still, frozen world. Outside, the town and surrounding fields seemed suspended in time, each flake of snow both covering and revealing the landscape. And in the quiet rhythm of routine and reflection, Bastogne endured as a place of thought and presence. Nature was both adversary and companion, shaping endurance in subtle, persistent ways. The frost on tents sparkled faintly in early morning light, each crystal a silent witness to the town's quiet rhythm. Soldiers adjusted sleeping bags, checked positions, and moved with careful deliberation, their breaths visible in the still air. Letters lay in pockets and desks, ink dried or wet, ready to carry stories across time and distance. Small gestures became essential, a gentle adjustment of a blanket, a shared nod, the passing of water from hand to hand. The snow-covered streets and fields held both beauty and quiet threat, shaping awareness without words. Even fatigue became part of the rhythm, a gentle reminder of body and mind's endurance. Medics offered warmth and comfort in hushed tones, their presence steady and slow. Soldiers traced each ridge and tree line with careful attention, reading patterns in snow as if they were words themselves. And as the day passed softly, Bastogne moved within itself, a frozen world both challenging and serene. Each breath, each letter, each measured step carried the heartbeat of life onward. Cold evenings brought the town into a muted glow, fires flickering softly against the deepening snow. Men gathered near hearths or stoves, sharing warmth and quiet words. The act of speaking softly, of listening intently, became a ritual, shaping the still air into gentle rhythm. Letters continued to be written, envelopes folded carefully, thoughts carried across the silence of winter. Frost clung to hair, eyelashes, and uniforms, a constant reminder of presence and fragility. Soldiers adjusted boots and gloves, shared blankets, and exchanged small gestures of care. Even the act of walking along frozen roads or through deep snow became deliberate, a meditation in motion. And through the soft cadence of night, the town breathed slowly, anchored in routine, letters and quiet attention. Bastogne was a frozen world, yet not empty. Life persisted in every small act of endurance. Each heartbeat and word shaped a delicate harmony within the harsh, snow-filled landscape. Morning returned pale and silver, reflecting off rooftops and snow-laden streets. Soldiers rose slowly, stretching stiff limbs, adjusting to the persistent chill. Letters resumed their quiet journey, words inscribed with careful hands, bringing warmth and reassurance across distance. Even the smallest tasks, boiling water, repairing clothing, tending to foxholes, became acts of meditation, part of the town's rhythm. Snow crunched softly beneath boots, as men moved with measured care, attentive to both surroundings and each other. Meals were shared quietly, laughter muted yet present, grounding the soldiers in the small comforts of life. The town itself seemed suspended, each building and road softened by snow, every edge gentle in its clarity. And through it all, letters remained conduits of thought, memory and hope, carrying hearts to those beyond the frozen landscape. Bastogne's pulse persisted, slow, deliberate, and steady beneath the watchful presence of winter. The endurance of body and soul continued, carried in every breath, every gesture, every word written in the stillness. Frost began to cling more stubbornly as the day stretched, forming delicate patterns on windows, equipment, and clothing. Soldiers paused to notice small beauties, the shimmer of ice on branches, the subtle curve of snowdrifts, the quiet rustle of wind. Letters were tucked carefully into coats, shared in small moments, or written by firelight, each one a meditation in presence. Hands were warmed by proximity to others, by careful rotation near small stoves or embers. The rhythm of survival became almost invisible, a tapestry woven from motion, attention, and reflection. Snow muffled the distance, allowing thoughts to stretch and drift freely in the calm air. Even routine inspections and preparations became gentle exercises in patience and observation. And as evening approached, the frozen world held both its quiet challenge and its subtle beauty, shaping endurance in every corner of the town. Bastogne existed within the snow, frost, and lettered words, steady in its persistence. Life continued, soft, deliberate, and quietly resilient. Night deepened over the town, silver light reflecting off untouched snow, soft and hypnotic. Soldiers settled into foxholes and tents, hands warm from small gestures of care and blankets pressed close. Letters lay folded on tables, desks, or laps, carrying thoughts and prayers in slow, measured rhythm. The wind moved gently across rooftops, sounding almost like whispered accompaniment to the town's quiet heartbeat. Even the frost and cold became part of the meditation, pressing awareness into bodies and minds without urgency. Meals were small, shared, and deliberate, each bite grounding soldiers in continuity. The snow-coated streets and ridges remained still, holding both presence and absence in gentle balance. And as sleep approached, Bastogne rested beneath the quiet watch of winter, its people anchored in routine, reflection, and letters written by trembling yet determined hands. The frozen world carried on, slow and unbroken, shaping endurance of both body and soul. And beneath the silvered snow, Bastogne exhaled gently, preparing for the days yet to unfold. The snow lay heavy across Bastogne, muffling sound and softening edges, yet within the town, tension coiled quietly like a held breath. Soldiers shuffled letters, prepared rations, and adjusted positions, each aware of the invisible thread that tied them together. In the midst of this frozen world, an unexpected message arrived, an ultimatum from the German command, soft on paper but heavy in implication. The words were precise, formal, yet carried an unspoken weight: surrender or face consequences. Silence lingered as the message was read aloud, each listener absorbing its gravity in quiet contemplation. General McAuliffe held it carefully, the paper thin in his gloved hands, his eyes reflecting both the frost outside and the pressure within. Around him, aides and officers waited, the soft rustle of coats and papers punctuating stillness. And then, in that moment, suspended between threat and response, a single word emerged, simple and startling. Nuts. It was more than defiance. It was a gentle affirmation that humor could exist even in the quietest darkness. Bastogne exhaled softly through the ripple of understanding, a small, surreal triumph echoing in the frost. The word travelled slowly, first from McAuliffe's lips to those closest, then spreading like a soft wind through the town's defenders. Soldiers paused in their movements, recognizing the absurdity amidst the tension, and for a fleeting moment, breath seemed lighter. Snow fell against coats and boots, as if in approval, soft and continuous, accompanying the unspoken chuckle in the heart of Bastogne. The absurdity did not diminish seriousness. It reframed it, reminding all that courage could carry, both resolve and gentle humor. Aides exchanged glances, quiet smiles forming under fur-lined hoods and hats. Even in the cold, every gesture of reassurance, every nod of understanding, was amplified by the laughter that remained tucked inside. Outside, snow smoothed the ridges and streets, holding the silence around them like a soft embrace. And in that embrace, the town's rhythm shifted subtly, measured now by both vigilance and the warm pulse of shared amusement. Bastogne had endured first snow, frost, and hunger, and now it held its spirit through a simple, defiant word. The siege continued, but light lingered quietly in the frost-bitten air. The story of nuts began to ripple beyond McAuliffe's tent, reaching foxholes, posts, and the quiet ridges surrounding the town. Soldiers whispered it carefully, repeating the word as though it were a charm against fear. Frost-laden boots pressed into snow as men shared nods and muted smiles. The rhythm of their patrols softened by subtle joy. The absurdity offered perspective. Even in extreme pressure, humor could be a gentle anchor, steadying hearts against the relentless cold. Letters written home captured fragments of it, conveyed in the understated tones of those who sought to reassure loved ones. Inside tents, men replayed the moment, savoring its quiet power, the warmth of shared humanity. Snowflakes fell against shoulders and gloves, each landing softly, as if marking the subtle triumph within the frozen world. Even the wind seemed to whisper through trees and rooftops, carrying hints of levity in its icy pass. And through it all, Bastogne's people, soldiers and civilians alike, found strength in the delicate interplay of tension and gentle absurdity. The town endured, resilient in both spirit and quiet courage. McAuliffe's word became a soft rhythm, a pulse threaded into every motion of the day. Soldiers checked positions and equipment, careful but less burdened by unspoken dread. Foxholes and snow-dusted ridges held the same vigilance as before. Yet each act of preparation was tempered by the understanding that humor could coexist with duty. Letters moved slowly, words careful, yet carrying hints of that defiance to homes far away. Even the snow seemed lighter somehow, falling not just as a challenge, but as accompaniment to endurance and spirit. A sense of unity settled across posts, the simple word shaping silent acknowledgement between men who shared frostbitten hands and breath. The townspeople, unaware of the immediate moment, still sensed a shift, subtle as wind over roofs, in the calm rhythm of life beneath snow. And in the quiet night, with letters tucked safely and foxholes fortified, Bastogne carried forward, patient and steady. Courage, it seemed, could be small, contained, and even humorous. The siege pressed on, yet the town breathed with gentle defiance. The laughter tucked beneath uniforms and tents was soft, a quiet thread woven into snow and wind. Soldiers carried it with care, gentle as a candle flame, mindful of its fragility and strength alike. Even in small gestures, adjusting a blanket passing tea, or straightening a rifle strap, that warmth persisted. The snow reflected pale light, silent yet witness to the shift in mood. Each repetition of the word brought focus, a gentle rhythm of courage in the midst of isolation. Mail and notes captured the essence, and distant families received it through letters written in careful hands. Every moment of attention, every deliberate step or measured breath became infused with subtle optimism. The surrounding forest, heavy with snow and silence, seemed less imposing under this small, shared triumph. And through the quiet, Bastogne's defenders moved with renewed steadiness, soft and deliberate in their preparation. The word lingered in frost-bitten air, an emblem of calm and human resilience. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly over streets and ridges, carrying the quiet pulse of endurance. Soldiers checked perimeters with measured care, each footstep deliberate, each glance patient. The moment of levity had not erased danger, yet it had shaped perception, transforming tension into steady awareness. Hands warmed hands, blankets were shared, letters tucked in pockets, all small gestures amplified by the rhythm of subtle defiance. Even the wind seemed less harsh, its passage softened by snow and a shared silent smile. The outlying positions, Foy, Noville, Marvy, hummed with quiet recognition, each soldier aware that persistence and perspective traveled faster than snowflakes, and as night approached, the soft glimmer of moonlight on frost mirrored the gentle pulse of shared humor beneath hardship. Bastogne moved through time with patient continuity, the siege pressing yet softened by spirit. Every heartbeat, every breath became part of the meditation of resilience. The frozen world held steady, shaped by snow, patience, and a word that warmed the heart. Evening deepened, silver and muted, over snow-draped rooftops and ridges. Soldiers huddled near stoves or fires, exchanging quiet nods and measured smiles. Nuts echoed softly in whispers, an internal rhythm of courage and subtle joy. Letters carried fragments of it outward, gentle pulses of hope across distance, threading through frostbitten nights and dim tents. The cold pressed against boots and fingers, yet the warmth of defiance persisted, shaping awareness as much as strategy. Even fatigue was softened by shared levity, bodies moving with measured care, minds carrying a quiet sense of perspective. The snow-coated town seemed suspended, patient, watching, while the defenders' spirits intertwined with its rhythm. And through it all, Bastogne endured in stillness, steady and calm, its heartbeat threaded with humor, patience and quiet triumph. Every gesture, every breath, every letter became a testament to endurance. The town's spirit was unbroken, a gentle, enduring pulse in frozen air. By midnight, the quiet held deep, silvered in moonlight and snow. Soldiers rested in foxholes or tents, hands tucked against cold, letters folded carefully on laps or desks. The memory of McAuliffe's defiance persisted, soft and steady, shaping mood and attention alike. Frost formed delicate patterns on tents and rooftops, silent witnesses to quiet courage. Even as snow drifted and wind whispered, the town maintained its rhythm, deliberate and slow. Letters traveled onward, carrying humor and connection across vast distance, each line a meditation in presence. Soldiers adjusted blankets, gloves, and scarves, sharing warmth without urgency, every gesture deliberate. And through the long, silent night, Bastogne held, patient, calm, and quietly triumphant, a town whose spirit endured like soft light against the frost. The siege pressed on, yet hope glimmered gently, steady as the snowfall. And beneath the silvered quiet of snow and frost, the word nuts became more than humor. It became a soft heartbeat of resilience, carrying Bastogne forward into the night. Snow continued to fall steadily over Bastogne, thick and unbroken, shaping streets and ridges into a seamless white landscape. The men of the 101st Airborne moved quietly among foxholes and barricades, their movements deliberate, measured against the relentless cold. Air support and supply drops were halted by weather, leaving them to rely on slow, careful rationing and the rhythm of patient vigilance. Amid this isolation, small acts of care became monumental, sharing blankets, adjusting gear, and offering soft words of reassurance. Priests moved among the soldiers, their presence gentle, hands resting briefly on shoulders, murmuring prayers that carried warmth into frozen air. The wounded were tended with soft diligence, every gesture precise and intentional, each touch an offering of calm amidst pressure. Snow drifted over boots and tents, muffling sound, and creating a quiet cocoon around the town. And in that cocoon, faith became both tangible and invisible, shaping endurance through attention and shared presence. The town held, guided by invisible threads of care, ritual, and resolve. Each breath, each step became part of a slow meditation on courage and patience. Men knelt quietly on snow-dusted ground or in tents, heads bowed, hands clasped, letting the rhythm of prayer guide them. Their voices were low, measured, blending with the soft wind and falling snow outside. Every word carried intention, a thread of connection reaching beyond the town to home, to loved ones, to a higher presence. The wounded lay wrapped in blankets, hands held briefly, murmurs exchanged that spoke more than instruction or comfort. Outside, snow pressed against wooden beams and foxhole edges, a persistent reminder of the element's presence. Soldiers shared glances, small acknowledgements of shared endurance, the soft language of comradeship carrying them forward. Even in fatigue, gestures remained deliberate, a gentle choreography of attention, warmth, and observation. And as prayers wove through tents and trenches, courage took the form of stillness, a quiet acceptance of circumstance and time. The wind carried soft whispers across the town, blending the human pulse with the rhythm of winter. Bastogne endured, grounded in faith, patience, and the gentle persistence of its defenders. Rations were shared quietly, each bite a measured gesture of care and sustenance. Soldiers adjusted clothing and blankets, mindful of frost and fatigue, careful not to disturb the fragile calm. Priests continued their rounds, murmuring words of comfort, moving slowly among foxholes and tents with deliberate attention. Each touch, each word became a meditation in presence, a rhythm of endurance against both weather and circumstance. Snow pressed against rooftops and ridges, muffling distant sound and shaping awareness of the town as both fragile and enduring. Letters continued to be written, carrying thoughts, prayers, and hope across the invisible distances to family and friends. Even in quiet moments of reflection, soldiers sensed the strength in stillness, the power of deliberate attention to small acts. And in these small rituals, meals, prayers, shared gestures, Bastogne's defenders found sustenance beyond food, beyond instruction. The town moved forward with steady breath and patient resolve. Each heartbeat, each word, each prayer carried the weight of endurance into snow-draped hours. Frost glimmered along edges of tents and parapets, sparkling faintly in pale daylight, a reminder of both beauty and challenge. Soldiers shifted slowly, tending gear, adjusting scarves, exchanging quiet nods, every gesture part of a shared rhythm. Priests whispered over the wounded, hands resting softly on blankets, murmuring phrases that brought comfort and presence without urgency. Even the wind, pressing against rooftops and ridges, seemed to encourage reflection, urging a slower awareness of time and place. Men shared bread, hot water, or a quiet word, actions small but resonant in the rhythm of survival. Letters were folded with care, tucked close to the heart, or in coat pockets, carrying intention and thought. Every movement became part of a meditation, a deliberate engagement with the world, slow yet significant. And as the day moved on, Bastogne's defenders learned to carry faith in gesture, breath, and observation. The storm outside pressed on, yet inside, calm perseverance shaped the town's pulse. Courage existed quietly here, threaded through patience, prayer, and shared care. Evening brought soft light, silvered and muted, over snow-laden streets and rooftops. Soldiers huddled in tents and foxholes, adjusting blankets, sharing warmth with deliberate attention. Priests continued their gentle rounds, prayers weaving softly through tents, leaving calm in their wake. Each wounded soldier received measured care, hands brushing lightly, words whispered carefully, creating small moments of meditation amidst endurance. Snow drifted softly outside, turning streets and ridges into smooth expanses, each flake a quiet participant in the rhythm of time. Meals were small, shared, deliberate, each bite grounding body and mind in continuity. Letters carried thoughts and hopes outward, small vessels of reassurance across distance. Even fatigue became part of the rhythm, a gentle ebb interwoven with careful movement, observation, and faith. And in the quiet rhythm of winter evening, Bastogne's defenders continued, patient, steady, anchored in presence. The town's pulse persisted, shaped by snow, prayer, and subtle endurance. Night settled softly, silvered by pale moonlight, snow crunching quietly under boots. Soldiers lay in foxholes, adjusting gloves and scarves, hands warmed by proximity to one another. Priests whispered blessings, hands resting lightly on shoulders, creating calm in the hush of frost-laden tents. Letters were read and folded, each word a connection, a thread reaching beyond walls and snow to family and home. The wind moved softly across rooftops and trees, carrying whispers of endurance and patience. Soldiers shared quiet gestures, a nod, a gentle touch, a smile beneath fur-lined hoods, sustaining both body and spirit. Even the snow-covered streets seemed suspended in time, observing the rhythm of calm and quiet attention. And through this gentle cadence, Bastogne persisted, grounded in faith, observation, and the subtle power of deliberate care. Each breath, each gesture, each prayer was a meditation in endurance and quiet courage. The frozen town exhaled softly, waiting for the dawn to carry it further. Morning light touched the snow, pale and silver, revealing quiet streets and frost-lined tents. Soldiers rose slowly, stretching stiff limbs, each motion deliberate, conscious of cold and fatigue. Priests moved softly among foxholes and tents, whispering blessings and calm words, hands warm and steady. Meals were shared in measured silence, each bite both sustenance and meditation, grounding the body against the chill. Letters were carefully folded and placed, carrying thoughts, hope, and connection outward to distant homes. Every gesture became part of the town's quiet rhythm, deliberate and patient, a choreography of endurance. Outside, snow softened ridges and rooftops, muffling distant sound, while amplifying attention to immediate presence. And through it all, faith threaded quietly among men, shaping courage not as spectacle, but as slow, calm acceptance. Bastogne moved forward in its rhythm, steady as snow and wind allowed. The soldiers carried the day softly, every breath and gesture a testament to endurance and presence. By afternoon, the snow continued to fall, soft and persistent, threading silence through streets and fields alike. Soldiers maintained vigilance, steps careful, movements deliberate, carrying presence through the cold. Priests whispered prayers over each wounded soldier, hands warm, offering quiet grounding in the rhythm of survival. Rations were shared slowly, gestures deliberate, each moment a meditation in patience and awareness. Letters continued their soft journey outward, carrying thought and comfort beyond the frozen town. Even fatigue became part of the cadence, a gentle ebb interwoven with attention, care and observation. Snow-laden rooftops and ridges reflected pale light, quiet witnesses to endurance, threading through time. And in the still silvered hours, Bastogne persisted, a town held by faith, patience, and the deliberate rhythm of its defenders. Courage flowed gently through movement, words, and prayer. The siege pressed on, yet Bastogne moved forward in calm, careful faith. For days, Bastogne had been wrapped in grey, clouds low and heavy, pressing the town into stillness and quiet patience. Snow lay thick on rooftops and streets, muffling movement and time alike, shaping the town into a soft, suspended world. The men of the 101st Airborne moved carefully, each breath visible, each step deliberate, their senses tuned to the rhythm of the siege. Yet slowly, imperceptibly, at first the clouds began to thin, light brushing softly across frost-laden ridges. A pale blue emerged above the snow-dusted town, delicate and unexpected, a gentle promise that the world beyond grey still existed. Soldiers paused briefly, heads tilted upward, noticing the shift without haste, letting the calm of observation settle over them. The snow reflected the faint sunlight, turning rooftops and ridges into silvered expanses that glimmered quietly. Even small movements, adjusting gloves, tucking letters, shifting blankets, felt softer in this new light. And in that soft illumination, hope began to unfurl subtly, like the first stirrings of spring beneath ice. Bastogne felt the moment of release, slow, gentle, and profoundly quiet. C-47s appeared overhead, their engines distant yet distinct, blending with the rhythm of wind and snow. Soldiers watched as parachutes blossomed gracefully into the pale sky, suspended like delicate flowers against a frozen landscape. Each chute carried small bundles of food, medical supplies, and hope, descending slowly in measured arcs. The snow below shimmered as packages touched roofs and streets, softly landing with gentle impact. Men moved carefully to retrieve them, unwrapping blankets and boxes, hands brushing snow aside in quiet ceremony. Even the cold seemed less pressing, softened by the sense of arrival and renewal. Letters were tucked into pockets alongside rations, small gestures of continuity and connection threaded into the act of survival. And as each package settled, the rhythm of life in Bastogne expanded slightly, allowing space for breath, for wonder, for quiet relief. The town, encircled yet enduring, began to feel lighter, a world opening slowly after days of grey suspension. Every fluttering parachute carried more than supplies. It carried the subtle pulse of renewed resolve. Men shifted from foxholes and barricades, stepping softly through snow to gather the small treasures delivered from above. The parachutes danced in slow arcs, their white canopies catching light, tracing patterns against the pale blue. Soldiers exchanged quiet words of acknowledgement, nods and smiles, each gesture measured and deliberate. The wind moved gently, carrying flakes of snow that glinted like tiny stars as they fell, soft and persistent. Packages were opened with care, rations passed hand to hand, creating rhythm in the delicate choreography of distribution. Even the wounded felt a subtle uplift, blankets adjusted, supplies shared, small comforts measured in gentle attention. Soldiers wrote notes in letters, tucking fragments of observation and gratitude into envelopes for home. And as the day brightened further, the town's pulse shifted, slow yet buoyant, a quiet reflection of endurance rewarded by light. Snow and sky intertwined in soft harmony, the world outside and inside Bastogne aligning gently. The siege continued, yet for the first time in days, space existed for wonder. The pale sunlight touched rooftops and streets, glinting on icy shingles, reflecting softly against bundled coats and blankets. Soldiers moved through foxholes with careful steps, the soft crunch of snow beneath boots, a grounding rhythm. Parachutes continued to float down, each one precise, deliberate, almost meditative in its arc. Even the wind seemed to soften, carrying the sound of cloth brushing against cloth, a subtle accompaniment to the quiet focus of the town. Men adjusted and shared supplies with small gestures, a nod, a brief word, a hand extended gently. Letters tucked into pockets or envelopes carried fragments of hope, carefully measured and preserved for distant eyes. Snow drifted in delicate patterns across ridges and streets, reflecting pale light like liquid silver, forming shapes both abstract and familiar. And as the packages were distributed, the soldiers felt the calm pulse of replenishment, slow and steady, mirrored in the rhythm of frost and sunlight. The town inhaled this small shift, suspended between the burden of winter and the gentle promise of support from above. Each moment of observation, collection, and care became a meditation in patience and quiet renewal. Over rooftops and along ridges, the parachute seemed to float with subtle grace, a gentle reminder that endurance could be met with tangible care. Soldiers retrieved supplies with deliberate attention, each step soft against snow, each hand careful in movement. Even the snow-laden streets felt lighter, softened by the rhythm of arrival and distribution. The wounded were wrapped with warmth, blankets adjusted, each gesture slow, careful, and grounding. Letters captured moments, thoughts, and gratitude, tucked into coats or boxes, tiny vessels of reflection in a white expanse. The wind brushed softly over the town, carrying flakes that glittered in sunlight, reflecting both calm and motion. And through the rhythm of care, distribution, and quiet observation, Bastogne breathed with subtle expansion. A town slowly lifted from isolation. The siege continued, yet its edges felt softened, its moments of relief punctuating the steady rhythm of survival. Soldiers moved with gentle purpose, each act of collection or sharing, carrying a quiet sense of possibility. Every fluttering parachute became part of the town's gentle meditation in endurance. Sunlight deepened subtly, brushing snow across streets, rooftops, and frozen trees with warm hints of reflection. Soldiers shifted carefully, adjusting gloves, coats, and blankets, moving with the deliberate rhythm of presence. Parachutes continued to drift gracefully, a steady pulse threading through the town, marking time in soft arcs. Each retrieved package brought a gentle sense of continuity, sustaining both body and spirit with measured, deliberate care. Even small gestures, offering bread, adjusting a wounded man's blanket, sharing a warm nod, carried significance, shaping the rhythm of quiet endurance. Snow glimmered across ridges, rooftops, and tents, reflecting light in gentle patterns that mirrored the town's calm pulse. Letters continued to be written, each line a meditation on hope, distance, and resilience. And as the day moved forward slowly, the soldiers sensed subtle release, a shift in the cadence of time and care. Bastogne's heartbeat carried forward with quiet optimism, grounded in deliberate attention and gentle rhythm. Every breath, every movement, every soft gesture became part of the meditation of hope returning. The air grew stiller, silvered by sunlight that softened the edges of buildings and snow-drifted streets. Soldiers paused to watch parachutes descend, marveling at their slow, deliberate arcs, noticing the delicate patterns of snow alongside them. Each package carried rations, blankets, and small items, yet their arrival resonated deeper, a quiet affirmation that endurance was recognized. Men shared each moment softly, hands exchanging supplies with care, eyes meeting in understanding and acknowledgement. Letters were written or folded, tucked close to hearts or in pockets, fragments of hope preserved in soft routines. The snow seemed to respond, drifting lightly over rooftops and streets, reflecting the gentle pulse of movement below. Even the wounded felt the rhythm of renewal. Blankets adjusted, attention shared, the town breathing softly around them. And through the quiet, deliberate distribution, Bastogne experienced an emotional release, a slow unfolding of hope into the frost-laden air. Soldiers walked softly among foxholes and tents, carrying both supplies and the subtle light of optimism. The siege continued, yet the frost-laden town moved gently toward brighter days. By late afternoon, the sky opened further, pale and endless, soft blue stretching above the town like a breath of calm. Soldiers paused in their work, looking upward, letting the light settle on faces, gear, and snow-laden streets. Parachutes floated down with deliberate grace, each package a quiet rhythm, soft arcs against the vast sky. The wind moved gently, lifting snowflakes like whispers, threading motion through the stillness of Bastogne. Packages were gathered, rations shared, blankets adjusted, letters folded with careful attention, all small acts forming a gentle choreography of care. Even fatigue became less pressing, softened by light and quiet movement. Each soldier finding rhythm in deliberate presence. Snow shimmered across rooftops and ridges, mirroring the subtle hope rising among men, the town exhaling slowly beneath pale light. And in that calm reflection, Bastogne carried forward, patient and deliberate, buoyed by both winter's quiet and the soft pulse of assistance from above. Every breath, every gesture, every shared smile became part of the meditation of endurance. The siege persisted, yet within it, hope had begun to bloom softly like snowflowers in sunlight. The white landscape of Bastogne trembled softly under the rumble of steel, moving through snow-laden streets and frozen fields. Tanks advanced with deliberate heavy rhythm, their tracks pressing into the thick frost, leaving deep furrows in the quiet town. Artillery fired in measured bursts, distant yet resonant, each thud vibrating through frozen ground and still air. Soldiers shifted in foxholes and trenches, alert and steady, moving with calm attention to rhythm and position. Snowflakes drifted over boots and shoulders, soft against the tense movements of bodies, braced for endurance. Even in the darkness, faint flares illuminated rooftops and ridges, their gentle arcs slicing silver through shadows without harshness. Men whispered to one another, voices soft and deliberate, conveying coordination, reassurance, and subtle resolve. The wind carried both sound and cold, threading through the town in continuous motion, shaping awareness and attention. And beneath the rhythm of steel and snow, Bastogne's defenders held steady, their breathing slow, measured and patient. Every motion, every adjustment, every glance became a meditation on persistence amid quiet tension. The night pressed down, thick and silvered, over streets and snow-covered trees. Tanks moved like immense, deliberate shadows, their rumble softened by drifting snow. Soldiers maintained their positions, hands tucked into gloves, bodies coiled with patience, adjusting blankets and rifles with care. Trace of fire arced softly across rooftops and ridges, thin lines of light weaving delicate patterns against the dark canvas of winter. Each flare revealed fleeting details, frost-laden streets, bundled figures, careful hands passing quietly among men. Even amidst the mechanical advance, gestures of care persisted, a nod, a whispered direction, a glove adjusted over cold fingers. The snow absorbed sound, softening movements and blending moments of tension with quiet observation. And in that rhythm, Bastogne's pulse remained steady, deliberate, slow yet alert to every nuance in steel and shadow. Soldiers navigated the night with measured presence, each step a testament to endurance and attentive patience. The town, wrapped in snow and steel, breathed through the quiet turbulence. Snow drifted along ridges, rooftops, and streets, coating footprints with soft silver. Soldiers shifted in place, their hands moving with precise attention, touching rifles, adjusting hoods, or tucking letters close to the chest. Tanks rolled steadily, armored behemoths pressing into snow, their presence deliberate and persistent, a rhythm against the still night. Artillery boomed in distant bursts, muffled by frost and drifting snow, each thud both warning and measure of endurance. Tracer lines lanced upward and across rooftops, arcs of silver and red that painted the night with restrained brilliance. Even in movement and noise, soldiers maintained a calm rhythm, voices low, gestures small but precise. Flakes continued to drift, each landing quietly, soft against the sharp geometry of steel and fortifications. And as night deepened, the pulse of Bastogne persisted, steady beneath rumble, flash, and frost-laden streets. Every shift of position, every measured breath, every careful action became part of a subtle meditation. The town endured, wrapped in both snow and the deliberate cadence of human attention. The armored advance moved methodically, tanks pressing tracks into frozen earth, their weight shaping both ground and awareness. Soldiers adjusted positions slowly, sliding boots through snow, tightening scarves, and aligning blankets for warmth and readiness. Tracers arced across rooftops in slow, deliberate lines, their glow reflected softly in snow and windows. Even distant artillery pulses were absorbed rhythmically, the town sensing both presence and distance in equal measure. Men whispered guiding movements, sharing subtle cues of coordination, patience, and focus. Snow drifted lazily over streets and parapets, a quiet observer smoothing edges of movement and steel alike. And in the muted glow of flares, Bastogne's defenders held steady, each breath and motion measured against the rhythm of night and motion. Letters tucked close to heart or pack reminded them of distant lives. Sustaining presence amid machinery and frost, the snow seemed to participate, softening, shaping, and reflecting light in harmony with the deliberate pulse of the town. Every motion became part of a slow meditation in endurance, attention, and rhythm. Ridges and rooftops reflected intermittent flares, silver arcs illuminating frozen streets and distant trees. Soldiers moved deliberately, adjusting gloves, hoods, and rifles, small gestures, echoing calm amid motion. Tanks advanced, heavy yet methodical, each track pressing into snow, leaving deep furrows like quiet metronomes. Artillery boomed in soft cadence, echoes threading through snow-laden streets and silent ridges. Tracer fire laced the sky in arcs that were both beautiful and purposeful, ribbons of controlled brilliance in a muted world. Even in the tension, men shared subtle signs. A nod, a touch, an acknowledgement. Grounding both body and attention, snowflakes drifted, soft and continuous, settling on hoods and shoulders, brushing over frost-covered ground with gentle insistence. And through the rhythm of steel, snow and human motion, Bastogne's pulse persisted, deliberate, measured, and slow. The night unfolded in layers of movement, breath, and careful observation. Each heartbeat, each careful step, became a meditation in perseverance under quiet turbulence. Men shifted in foxholes and barricades, deliberate in movement, careful in posture, attuned to rhythm of tanks and snow. Tracer arcs drew patterns over rooftops and frozen streets, a gentle choreography of light and shadow. Artillery pulses echoed softly through the town, their distance and intensity absorbed by the slow meditation of human attention. Snowflakes drifted across rifles, gloves, and hoods, soft as whispered affirmation of endurance. Soldiers shared small gestures, passing rations, adjusting blankets, exchanging quiet words, each a gentle reminder of connection amid tension. Even the rumble of tanks and mechanical advance blended into the cadence, a harsh pulse softened by observation and patience. And in the quiet choreography of night, Bastogne remained deliberate, measured, present in every small motion. The town breathed in rhythm with steel and snow, carrying both awareness and patience forward. Every breath, every glance, every subtle adjustment contributed to the enduring heartbeat of the siege. The night pressed on, yet Bastogne's pulse remained calm within the turbulence. The darkness deepened, silvered by soft reflections of snow and flares, a muted canopy over rooftops and streets. Soldiers moved slowly, deliberately, hands adjusting gear, eyes tracking light and shadow, steps measured through frost. Tanks rolled steadily, their weight pressing rhythm into streets and ridges, a slow, persistent presence. Tracer lines traced arcs across the sky, a quiet ballet of illumination over snow-laden earth. Artillery boomed at intervals, the echoes threading gently through frozen fields, absorbed by both earth and attention. Snow drifted endlessly, soft and patient, settling quietly on shoulders, rifles, and foxholes alike. Even small gestures, a whispered word, a glove extended, a blanket tucked tighter, carried resonance in the measured rhythm of endurance. And through this cadence of motion, light and snow, Bastogne persisted, deliberate and resilient, finding calm in presence amid peak tension. Each heartbeat, each breath, each careful action contributed to the meditation of perseverance. The night held steady, shaped by snow, steel, and subtle human attention. By dawn, pale light brushed the snow-laden streets, reflecting off rooftops and frozen ridges in gentle silver. Tanks had pressed their rhythm through the night, their tracks leaving marks in snow that glimmered softly in morning. Soldiers adjusted gloves, hoods, and scarves, pausing to breathe, eyes scanning the quieted streets and ridges with careful attention. Tracer arcs had faded with darkness, leaving subtle lines of reflection on snow and rooftops. Even distant artillery had softened, absorbed into the town's careful rhythm of movement and observation. Soldiers shared small gestures of reassurance, tucked letters and supplies, adjusting blankets and gear with measured care. and as light continued to filter over Bastogne, the town's pulse remained deliberate, each breath and motion a meditation in endurance and calm attention. Snow continued to drift softly, shaping streets, rooftops, and foxholes with gentle persistence. Every heartbeat, every step, every soft gesture carried forward the rhythm of survival, threading both caution and patience through the frozen landscape. Bastogne endured, wrapped in steel snow and the quiet rhythm of steadfast presence. Snow lay thick over Bastogne as Christmas Eve approached, blanketing rooftops and streets in a soft, luminous white. Inside the cellars, soldiers and civilians huddled together, sharing warmth and quiet presence, voices low and measured. Chocolate was passed slowly from hand to hand, its sweetness a small but powerful comfort in the frozen world. Some sang softly, the familiar hymns threading through stone walls and timber beams, each note measured and deliberate. The flicker of candles cast gentle shadows, revealing faces drawn tight with fatigue, but softened by shared care. Children leaned against parents or soldiers, their breaths mingling with the warmth of blankets and whispered words. Even in the quiet, small gestures carried immense weight. A hand placed on a shoulder, a blanket tucked carefully, eyes meeting in acknowledgement. Outside, snow drifted in patterns over frozen streets, silent witnesses to this delicate moment of humanity, and in the hushed cellars, the rhythm of endurance mingled with reverence, each heartbeat echoing patience. Bastogne, though encircled, carried within it a fragile pulse of quiet celebration. Voices rose and fell in gentle unison, singing hymns that had traveled across years and homes, soft yet steady against the distant hum of snow-laden streets. Soldiers exchanged chocolate quietly, sharing smiles that needed no words, gestures both simple and profound. Civilians whispered gratitude, their murmurs threading through the cellar like a gentle wind, connecting the present to memories of warmth and home. Children pressed close, their eyes bright in the candlelight, absorbing both sound and quiet presence around them. Each song, each bite, each whispered word became part of a shared meditation in survival and calm attention. Outside, the wind pressed lightly against the cellar walls, carrying faint flakes that tapped against frozen windows with delicate rhythm. The men listened, breath measured, allowing the moment to settle into the rhythm of time and endurance. And as notes of music rose and fell, the pulse of humanity persisted, unbroken and gentle. Even amid the siege, a sense of connection threaded through blankets, hands, and soft voices. Each breath and gesture contributed to the quiet heartbeat of Christmas in Bastogne. The candlelight flickered softly against stone walls, dancing in rhythm with the careful movements of hands passing small treats and letters. Soldiers adjusted coats and scarves, sharing warmth as much as food, every touch deliberate and patient. Civilians tucked children close, whispering stories, prayers, and quiet encouragement, grounding them against fear and cold. Chocolate was eaten slowly, shared in fragments, each piece a small but potent symbol of care and continuity. Songs carried through the cellar, sometimes hesitant, sometimes strong, threading memory, presence, and hope together. Even the cold seemed softened by the rhythm of voices, hands, and blankets. The frost held at bay by shared attention. Letters were folded carefully and tucked away, messages of love reaching across distance and danger. And in the hush between songs, the small flicker of candlelight illuminated the quiet fortitude that shaped the town's rhythm. Snow continued to drift outside, untouched yet present, mirroring the calm pulse inside the cellar. Each heartbeat, each gesture, each note contributed to a meditation on humanity, preserved amid adversity. Warmth threaded through blankets and clothing, a slow pulse against the chill pressed in from frozen streets above. Soldiers and civilians alike moved with deliberate care, shifting to share space, adjust clothing, or pass chocolate and letters. Hymns rose softly, blending with whispered words and the faint scratch of pen on paper. Children leaned against soldiers' shoulders, their breath soft in the candlelit air, absorbing the rhythm of calm attention. Outside, snow drifted silently, pressing softly against rooftops and windows, a gentle witness to this quiet celebration. The cellars hummed with small gestures, each movement deliberate, each glance measured, each breath part of a careful meditation. Chocolate was shared again, broken into small fragments, the sweetness lingering both on the tongue and in thought. And as the night deepened, songs continued to rise and fall, measured and soothing, weaving continuity into the delicate threads of presence. Letters, blankets, and whispered words carried hope in deliberate rhythm, a calm response to chaos above. Bastogne rested in this fragile, luminous cadence, a town holding together through attention, care, and quiet celebration. Voices softened further as children drifted toward sleep, leaning against parents or soldiers, bodies warm and safe under layered blankets. Soldiers adjusted their own hoods and coats, ensuring comfort and steady presence, the act itself a meditation in care. Candles flickered in gentle arcs, casting warmth across stone walls and timber beams, illuminating eyes that carried both fatigue and subtle relief. Chocolate wrappers were folded carefully, letters tucked away, and whispered stories lingered softly in the air. Even the wind seemed to pause, brushing lightly against cellar walls and frozen streets, respecting the fragile stillness within. Songs became quiet, carried only in memory, and whispered hums, threading calm through the shared space. And as night stretched, the pulse of Bastogne slowed, measured in breathing, soft touches, and small attentions. Snow outside continued to drift, silent and luminous, reflecting the gentle light that had carried human presence through the day. Every shared bite, note, and gentle word contributed to the meditation of survival and calm. In these quiet hours, humanity persisted, soft and deliberate, beneath snow and siege alike. Time moved slowly, measured by the rhythm of candlelight and quiet movement within the cellars. Soldiers adjusted blankets over the sleeping, shared rations quietly, and offered gentle words, each act deliberate and careful. Civilians whispered thanks and prayers, the subtle pulse of calm threading through stone walls and timber beams. Chocolate continued to circulate in small, measured portions, each bite lingering, a reminder of warmth and care. Hymns, whispered or softly sung, created a delicate rhythm that echoed in the quieted space. Children's breaths rose and fell, steadying the rhythm of presence with small movements of chest and hand. Outside, snow drifted like silvered threads, silent and patient, reflecting the gentle glow from within. And through these slow, deliberate acts, Bastogne held together, a fragile web of endurance, attention, and soft celebration. Letters, blankets, and hands carried human presence forward, reinforcing the calm pulse of the night. Every gesture became a meditation in quiet persistence, a gentle reflection of hope and connection. Soft music and whispered words continued as evening deepened into night, the cellar filled with a gentle sense of presence. Soldiers shared stories, small jokes, and quiet smiles, each exchange reinforcing attention and calm. Chocolate rationed with care lingered on the tongue, a sweetness magnified by scarcity and thoughtfulness. Children slept against warm shoulders, their tiny hands resting on coats and blankets, absorbing quiet comfort. Candles flickered in delicate arcs, throwing gentle shadows across stone walls and timber, marking the slow passage of time. Letters were tucked away, carrying fragments of thought and connection to distant homes, threads of continuity across space and danger. Even the wind outside seemed to soften in rhythm with voices, touching walls and streets with whispered patience. And as the night deepened, Bastogne exhaled softly, a town suspended in quiet humanity, its heartbeat steady in small gestures. Every breath, every movement, every note contributed to the meditation of presence, warmth, and care. Snow continued to drift beyond cellar walls, silent and luminous, echoing the gentle pulse within. By midnight, the cellar had settled into a hushed, luminous calm, soldiers and civilians alike, drawn into the rhythm of shared presence. Blankets were tucked, hands held briefly, whispers exchanged in deliberate, measured tones. Chocolate and rations had been shared completely, each portion transformed into quiet connection. Hymns had faded into hums and memory, carried softly in the minds of those present. Children breathed steadily, warmed by touch and presence, resting in the protective embrace of adults. Candles burned low, soft light reflecting in eyes and on stone, shaping shadows into gentle forms. Letters folded carefully carried hope and thought to distant places, silent but potent threads of continuity. And as snow drifted silently over rooftops and streets outside, Bastogne's pulse held steady within, deliberate and calm. Every gesture, every breath, every soft word became part of the meditation of Christmas Eve, a quiet celebration amid siege. In that stillness humanity persisted softly, deliberate and luminous beneath snow and stars alike. The frozen landscape of Belgium stretched endlessly as the Third Army moved southward, boots and tracks pressing rhythm into ice and mud. Each convoy advanced with careful determination, soldiers wrapped in heavy coats and scarves, bodies moving with deliberate patience. Snowdrift softened the edges of roads, turning ruts and furrows into silvered pathways that seemed to stretch without end. Tanks rolled steadily, their weight shaping both ground and awareness, engines humming a persistent low rhythm. Soldiers whispered among themselves, voices measured and steady, sharing small words of reassurance and quiet focus. Even the wind seemed slower here, brushing across frozen trees and rooftops in soft arcs, carrying distant echoes of Bastogne. Supplies were distributed in careful rhythm, blankets adjusted, and letters tucked close to hearts for warmth and memory. And through this measured advance, a sense of inevitability threaded among men, the town far ahead, a quiet beacon guiding every step. Ice and mud pressed against tires and boots, testing resolve without urgency, shaping attention into calm endurance. Each breath and movement carried the rhythm of persistence forward, slow and deliberate. Tracks cut into snow and frozen mud like silvered lines, marking the careful advance of men, tanks, and wagons through silent forests. Soldiers moved in steady rhythm, boots pressing into frost, gloves brushing against rifles, every motion deliberate and precise. Tanks and armored vehicles pressed steadily, their rumble softened by snow and wind, a continuous pulse threading the landscape. Conversations were minimal, whispers sharing strategy, reassurance, or simple acknowledgement of presence. Even as the landscape tested patience and coordination, men found quiet satisfaction in measured steps and shared movement. Letters were exchanged between comrades, words tucked carefully into pockets or packs, reminders of home and continuity. And as miles passed slowly beneath steady wheels and careful boots, the Third Army inched toward Bastogne, a distant promise, shaping rhythm and attention. Snow drifted across branches and roofs, soft and luminous, reflecting the gentle pulse of movement below. Every adjustment, Every glance, every careful placement of foot or hand contributed to the meditation of progress. The landscape, harsh yet soft under snow, carried forward the deliberate cadence of patience and resolve. Through forests thick with frost and silence, tanks and trucks moved with careful persistence, wheels pressing deep ruts into frozen paths. Soldiers adjusted scarves, coats, and gloves, each motion deliberate, small yet significant against the immensity of snow and ice. The distant rhythm of engines and tracks threaded the cold air with measured pulse, a subtle but constant accompaniment. Men shared quiet words of coordination, encouragement, or observation, voices soft yet grounding in presence. Snow drifted against the sides of vehicles, brushed against shoulders, and coated boots with gentle insistence, a constant companion on the slow march. Letters were passed hand to hand, small fragments of connection and memory threading through motion and frost. And as the Third Army advanced, mile by mile, the town of Bastogne remained a luminous goal, guiding attention through cold, snow, and fatigue. Even in silence, the rhythm of boots' tracks and careful breath carried forward the quiet pulse of hope. Every shared glance, every deliberate movement, every slow adjustment contributed to the meditative cadence of progress. The frozen world, though harsh, offered space for reflection and measured determination. Convoys pressed through narrow roads flanked by snow-laden trees, each turn deliberate and patient, engines humming beneath frost. Soldiers shifted in trucks and tanks, adjusting blankets, checking rifles, and sharing whispered words of focus and reassurance. Snow drifted in soft patterns across windshields and hoods, reflecting light from pale winter skies with subtle brilliance. Every mile was measured, careful, slow, each movement absorbed into rhythm of boots and tracks, pressing against frozen earth. Letters passed among soldiers carried quiet reminders of home, love, and connection, sustaining attention amid monotony. Even distant artillery echoes softened in the snow, resonating like gentle markers of distance rather than threat. And as the army pressed southward, the landscape unfolded steadily, a frozen rhythm guiding patient minds and steady hands. Conversations were minimal, deliberate, measured, each word weighted with intention and calm attention. Snow drifted in graceful arcs over tires and coats, a silent witness to the slow, relentless cadence. Every breath, every shift, every deliberate step threaded toward the distant pulse of Bastogne. Through icy fields and forested ridges, trucks and tanks traced paths with steady rhythm, tires and tracks pressing deliberate marks into the frozen earth. Soldiers adjusted clothing, gloves, and scarves, bodies coiled with patient awareness, every gesture intentional. Snow fell softly around them, brushing shoulders and metal, a quiet counterpoint to the low hum of engines and movement. Whispers carried instructions, encouragement, and subtle reflections, each exchange measured and precise. Letters and small tokens passed from hand to hand, moments of calm and memory threading through the persistent march. Even the wind seemed to slow in rhythm with men and machinery, lifting snowflakes in soft arcs that danced and settled quietly. And as each mile passed, the goal of Bastogne shaped thought and attention, a distant presence guiding careful progress. Every turn of a wheel, every pressed boot, every gentle adjustment of gear became a meditative act of persistence. Soldiers moved deliberately, aligning breath, gaze, and motion in quiet, attentive rhythm. Snow-laden forests and fields held the pulse of the march, softening both rigor and resolve. Tires and tracks pressed through icy mud, the rhythm of movement constant yet unhurried, measured by distance and attention. Soldiers shifted in place, adjusting hoods, scarves, and blankets, breathing steadily with careful awareness of presence and task. Tanks rumbled softly over frozen ground, their weight and motion shaping rhythm into snow and soil alike. Whispers of coordination and brief exchanges threaded among men, soft and precise, carrying focus without haste. Letters tucked into packs or pockets held fragments of warmth, memory, and hope, preserved against cold and fatigue. Even drifting snow softened the harshness of landscape, landing gently on helmets, coats, and tires in measured cadence. And as the army pressed forward, mile after mile, the distant pulse of Bastogne guided attention and action in slow meditation. Every hand movement, glance, and careful step became part of the rhythm of endurance. Snow-laden forests and roads carried men patiently, shaping body and thought in concert with motion. The march, deliberate and continuous, moved steadily toward the trapped town's silent heartbeat. Engine hums and tire tracks threaded together like a soft, persistent melody over the frost-coated landscape. Soldiers shifted blankets and coats, moving with gentle care, each adjustment part of the meditation of presence. Snowflakes drifted in arcs above metal and leather, settling softly on shoulders and hoods, reflecting pale winter light. Words were few but precise, whispered across trucks and tanks, instructions and encouragement, threading carefully through space. Letters, shared and tucked, carried warmth and continuity, a quiet pulse connecting soldiers to distant homes. Even distant echoes of conflict seemed muted by snow and patience, absorbed into rhythm rather than fear. And as the army advanced, each deliberate mile stitched movement, breath, and thought into a meditative cadence. Boots pressed into frost, wheels traced tracks, and hands adjusted gear, all part of the slow rhythm of progression. Soldiers walked and moved with calm awareness, each gesture deliberate, attentive, sustaining focus. The frozen world moved with them, carrying a quiet sense of purpose toward Bastogne's awaiting pulse. By late afternoon, the Third Army continued its slow, relentless push, each mile a meditation in endurance and attention. Snow lay across fields and ridges in soft patterns pressed lightly by tracks and boots, shaping a landscape both harsh and serene. Soldiers adjusted coats, gloves, and hoods, sharing quiet words, small gestures, and letters tucked close to chests. Tanks rumbled steadily through mud and ice, engines humming a low, persistent rhythm beneath drifting snow. Whispers of coordination threaded among men, measured and deliberate, guiding every careful step. Even the wind seemed to slow in reverence, lifting snowflakes softly, carrying the pulse of motion with gentle insistence. And as the miles passed, the distant glimmer of Bastogne threaded thought, guiding attention, effort, and breath with quiet patience. Every movement, every glance, every deliberate gesture carried forward the meditative rhythm of progress. Soldiers and vehicles moved in unison with the frozen world, each element contributing to the calm determination shaping the march. The town waited ahead, silent and luminous, drawing the Third Army ever closer through rhythm, patience, and steady resolve. December 26 arrived like pale light through frost-laden trees, brushing Bastogne with soft clarity as tanks and trucks approached from distant roads. Soldiers in the town heard the low rumble first, subtle yet insistent, pressing rhythm into the frozen earth, and their quiet awareness, eyes widened, disbelief threading through measured attention, and a sense of cautious anticipation filled foxholes and cellars. Snow shifted gently under the weight of tracks and boots, each movement carrying a quiet pulse of change. Letters tucked close to chests vibrated in rhythm with hearts, small reminders of distant homes and continuity, Soldiers adjusted blankets, hoods, and scarves, steadying themselves as the distant hum grew into deliberate presence. Even the wind seemed to pause, brushing lightly over rooftops and trees, carrying with it the faint scent of engines and oil. And in the careful attention to movement and breath, Bastogne felt the subtle turning of the tide, fragile yet insistent, relief threaded slowly through whispered words and glances, cautious and deliberate, measuring hope against exhaustion. Each moment, slow and attentive, became part of the quiet rhythm of survival, reshaping awareness toward life and presence. Tracks pressed into snow-laden streets as tanks moved steadily closer, their weight marking the rhythm of relief and careful expectation. Soldiers in foxholes adjusted positions, coats and scarves tight against wind, eyes attuned to movement, listening to the deliberate pulse of approaching steel. Children pressed close to parents, their breaths steady in small rhythm, sensing changes without full understanding. Even distant artillery seemed softened, absorbed by snow and anticipation, echoes threading gently through the town. Letters and small gifts were shared hand to hand, reminders of connection and warmth, threading through frozen hours. Soldiers whispered encouragement and subtle recognition, voices slow and deliberate, blending attention with measured patience. And as tanks rolled into Bastogne, the town's pulse shifted, careful and unhurried, threading relief through fatigue and attention. Every movement, glance and gesture became a meditation on endurance, presence and cautious celebration. Snow drifted softly across rooftops and tracks, reflecting pale light, mirroring the deliberate rhythm within. Bastogne breathed slowly, absorbing the arrival of help, like gentle, persistent sunlight. Steel pressed into frozen ground as tanks advanced through streets lined with hushed, attentive soldiers. Men adjusted gloves, scarves and blankets, grounding themselves in measured breath, each action deliberate against the slow rhythm of unfolding relief. Civilians peeked from cellars and doorways, tentative curiosity, threading through blankets, and whispered conversations. Snow settled softly on vehicles and rooftops, absorbing sound and shaping perception, a gentle canvas for the quiet drama. Soldiers exchanged brief, careful words, each syllable slow and weighted, threading reassurance through fatigue and disbelief. Letters and mementos tucked in pockets were glanced at briefly, reminders of connection threading through careful observation. And as tanks pressed further into Bastogne, a rhythm of cautious movement threaded the town, deliberate yet luminous, echoing survival rather than triumph. Eyes traced tracks in snow, noting careful placement and steady advance, each observation part of measured attention. Every breath, glance, and gesture contributed to the meditation of endurance and careful hope. Relief settled softly into bodies and minds, a luminous quiet threading the frozen streets. The hum of engines grew steadily, low and persistent, pressing rhythm into both frozen streets and the hearts of those waiting. Soldiers rose slowly, boots pressing gently into snow, rifles cradled with calm attention, bodies coiled in patient awareness. Tanks moved steadily, tracks pressing deliberate patterns into streets and fields, echoing a rhythm both heavy and precise. Civilians observed from hidden places, eyes wide with cautious curiosity, hands folded quietly, breaths measured. Letters were read slowly, words absorbed in silence, fragments of memory and hope threading through attentive minds. Even the snow seemed to pause, drifting softly over shoulders, rooftops and tracks, reflecting the low hum of engines. And as the armored advance threaded into the town, each deliberate movement reshaped attention, threading relief carefully through fatigue. Soldiers whispered soft acknowledgments, small gestures of patience and recognition, passing hand to hand. Every observation, breath, and subtle gesture became part of a slow meditative rhythm of survival. Bastogne held itself steady, letting the pulse of arrival settle softly through stone, snow, and hearts alike. Tracks and boots pressed the rhythm of change into streets, snow cushioning each heavy tread in muted silver. Soldiers shifted deliberately, adjusting hoods, scarves, and blankets, moving with calm awareness of each small motion. Civilians shared quiet smiles and nods, eyes reflecting the soft light and measured attention threading through the town. Tanks rolled steadily, engines humming persistent, low chords threading motion into the frozen landscape, letters tucked into pockets, blankets adjusted, and hands brushed gently in acknowledgement. All subtle markers of presence and endurance. Even distant sounds seemed softened, absorbed by snow and deliberate observation, blending into the careful pulse of the day. And as the armored advance continued, a rhythm of slow, attentive relief threaded through Bastogne, delicate yet persistent. Soldiers paused occasionally, sharing soft words and measured glances, integrating movement with careful reflection. Every breath, gesture, and observation became part of the meditative cadence of survival and connection. Snowflakes drifted gently against rooftops and tracks, echoing the quiet pulse threading through the town streets. Through frost-laden streets, tracks pressed steady rhythm into snow, engines humming low and deliberate, a gentle pulse of presence. Soldiers adjusted coats, gloves, and scarves, moving carefully in alignment with rhythm of boots and metal. Civilians watched from cellars and doorways, faces illuminated by pale winter light, curiosity and relief threading softly through their presence. Letters passed and read, threaded warmth and connection into the silent attention of soldiers and townspeople alike. Even the drifting snow carried gentle witness, settling on vehicles, streets, and rooftops with quiet patience. And as tanks threaded through the town, the measured pulse of survival echoed in every glance, gesture, and careful step. Soldiers shared soft acknowledgement of one another, hands brushed in reassurance, breath aligned with presence, threading calm through fatigue. Every observation, movement, and note of engines contributed to the meditation of endurance, subtle and luminous. Snowdrifts reflected pale sunlight, mirroring the slow relief settling into minds and bodies alike. Bastogne's pulse, deliberate and attentive, absorbed the rhythm of arrival without haste or sudden triumph. Steel pressed lightly through streets, pressing patterns into snow, engines humming steady chords beneath drifting flakes. Soldiers adjusted blankets, coats, and hoods, movements measured, deliberate, threaded with careful awareness. Civilians pressed gently against walls or each other, eyes reflecting soft light and attentive observation, breath slow and measured, letters tucked close, chocolate shared slowly, and small gestures passed quietly from hand to hand, sustaining connection and warmth. Even distant echoes softened in snow, absorbed into rhythm rather than urgency, threading patience through the pulse of the town. And as tanks pressed fully through Bastogne, the quiet rhythm of relief settled in bodies and minds, a steady meditation on survival rather than triumph. Soldiers whispered acknowledgments, small gestures threading continuity through fatigue, snow, and observation. Every breath, glance, and movement became part of the cadence of careful endurance. Snow continued to drift, soft and luminous, reflecting light and presence in harmony with measured attention. The town exhaled gently, holding the pulse of life steady amid the breaking of the ring. By late afternoon, Bastogne breathed in a slow, deliberate rhythm, tracks and boots pressing calm presence into snow-laden streets. Soldiers shifted with careful awareness, blankets adjusted, gloves brushed against rifles, breath measured and steady. Civilians emerged cautiously, eyes wide but calm, hands brushing against each other, in quiet acknowledgement. Engines hummed low, tanks rolled steadily, the rhythm of movement threading deliberate presence through streets and alleys. Letters were tucked into pockets, whispered words exchanged, chocolate and small gifts shared slowly, fragments of continuity threading through observation. Even the wind seemed gentle, lifting snowflakes in soft arcs, echoing the slow pulse threading through both bodies and landscape. And as tanks pressed deeper into Bastogne, each measured movement carried relief softly forward, careful and luminous. Soldiers and civilians aligned subtly with rhythm, gestures small but deliberate, threading attention through fatigue and snow. Every breath, glance, and step contributed to the meditation of survival, calm and attentive, delicate yet persistent. Bastogne endured, alive in quiet presence, absorbing relief slowly, deliberately under frost, snow, and the pulse of arrival. The morning after the siege arrived pale and soft, sunlight brushing snow-covered ruins with gentle clarity. Bastogne lay quiet, streets traced with footprints and tracks, and the stillness carried both relief and weight. Soldiers moved slowly, attending to tasks that now felt heavy with reflection, each step measured against exhaustion and attention. Civilians emerged from cellars, faces drawn and pale, yet eyes carrying quiet gratitude for survival. Blankets were folded carefully, letters tucked away, and small gestures of care threaded through the ruins. The town, battered but breathing, carried in every wall and stone the memory of endurance, deliberate and slow. Even the wind seemed softened, drifting lightly over broken streets and snow, threading attention through silence. And in this measured quiet, the first recognition of cost pressed gently, a pulse both delicate and insistent. Every glance at rooftops, snow, and streets became a meditation on what had passed and what remained. Bastogne exhaled slowly, holding the rhythm of reflection in careful balance. Snow began to shift under thawing sunlight, wet and glistening, reflecting the muted colors of rubble and timber. Soldiers assisted in moving supplies, adjusting blankets, and preparing the wounded for evacuation. Each movement deliberate and calm. Civilians carried small belongings, eyes cast downward, breaths measured, as if honoring both loss and endurance. Letters were exchanged with soft words, fragments of connection threading through reflective silence. Even distant engines hummed gently, their presence a low, steady chord against the subtle rhythm of thawing snow. And as the day unfolded, the weight of survival settled in quiet pulses through the town, threads of attention woven with patience. Soldiers and civilians alike moved slowly, carrying fatigue, relief, and reflection in equal measure, each gesture deliberate and attentive. Snow melted in irregular paths, carrying quiet reminders of sacrifice and resilience. Every breath, every step, and every gentle movement threaded calm through observation and presence. Bastogne held itself in attentive, reflective rhythm, listening to both past and present with quiet awareness. The streets, once crowded with movement and tension, now carried only the slow rhythm of recovery and care. Soldiers adjusted packs, shifted blankets, and moved equipment with deliberate awareness, conscious of both exhaustion and fragile life around them. Civilians wandered carefully, touching doorframes and walls that had witnessed endurance, their hands slow and reverent. Snow underfoot softened as it thawed, glistening wetly, reflecting quiet attention and measured reflection. Letters were read in hushed tones, fragments of hope and memory, threading gently through breath and gesture. Even the wind seemed aware, drifting lightly across rooftops and streets, carrying faint scents of earth and timber warmed by thaw. And as each minute passed, Bastogne absorbed the subtle pulse of endurance, threading awareness of cost into every quiet action. Soldiers shared slow acknowledgements, hands brushed gently, voices minimal yet present, threading calm through reflection. Every gesture, glance, and measured breath contributed to the meditation of survival and quiet presence. The town exhaled with gentle patience, attending to the weight of both memory and life. Through thawing streets and softened snow, soldiers assisted the wounded with careful, deliberate attention, each movement slow and precise. Blankets were adjusted, packs shifted, and small gestures of care threaded continuity into the rhythm of recovery. Civilians emerged, cautious yet steady, carrying small belongings and observing changes with measured awareness. Letters and small mementos passed hand to hand, fragments of connection threading gentle warmth through reflective silence. Even distant rumble of engines moved softly, merging into the quiet cadence of thawing snow and streets. And as soldiers and civilians worked together, Bastogne absorbed the rhythm of endurance, mindful of cost and tempered by careful relief. Every gesture, breath, and glance became part of the meditation of presence, attention, and reflection. Snow melted in uneven streams, softening edges, and carrying with it quiet reminders of the town's ordeal. Eyes traced rooftops, walls, and tracks, registering subtle marks of both struggle and survival. Bastogne held itself steady, deliberate and reflective, a town breathing slowly in the aftermath of endurance. The ruins of the town carried memory in every stone, every fractured wall, every softened trace in thawing snow. Soldiers moved among them carefully, attending to tasks that now bore weight in reflection and quiet attention. Civilians lingered in doorways, or walked slowly through streets, hands brushing gently across familiar textures. Breaths measured, letters were folded and tucked with care. Chocolate and small gifts passed in deliberate rhythm, sustaining fragments of warmth and continuity. Even the wind carried a soft note of reflection, drifting lightly across debris and streets, threading presence through silence. And as the day wore on, the pulse of Bastogne became measured, deliberate, slow, a meditation on endurance and survival. Soldiers and civilians shared nods, soft words, and gestures, connecting attention to both past effort and current reflection. Snow continued to melt unevenly, streams threading paths that glistened softly under pale sunlight. Every movement, glance, and gentle breath contributed to the rhythm of quiet awareness. The town exhaled slowly, holding both memory and presence in delicate balance. Through softened streets and muted echoes, soldiers and civilians moved with careful attention, threading deliberate rhythm through each step. Snow underfoot glistened wetly, reflecting pale light and subtle motion, a quiet partner to the pulse of recovery. Letters tucked close or exchanged softly carried fragments of memory, connection, and endurance. Blankets were folded and shifted, packs carried with steady hands, each motion deliberate and mindful. Even the distant hum of vehicles merged softly into the reflective cadence threading through thawing streets. And as time stretched gently, Bastogne's pulse slowed, attentive to both life preserved and costs endured. Soldiers shared brief acknowledgements, small gestures carrying quiet weight, threading calm through fatigue and awareness. Civilians traced walls, doors, and familiar objects with reverent attention, grounding presence in texture and memory. Every gesture, glance, and measured breath contributed to the meditative rhythm of endurance. The town exhaled in quiet, reflective cadence, attentive to the weight of survival. Rubble, melted snow, and thawing streets carried memory in delicate rhythm, each footstep threading presence through awareness. Soldiers shifted and adjusted, moving carefully, breaths measured, hands steady, mindful of every subtle motion. Civilians lingered with soft attention, small gestures of care and acknowledgement threading awareness through streets. Letters and mementos passed gently, carrying fragments of warmth, memory, and deliberate connection. Even the wind drifted lightly, lifting snowflakes and carrying quiet pulses through streets and alleys, threading reflection into presence. And as each moment unfolded, Bastogne absorbed the rhythm of both cost and continuity, deliberate and soft. Soldiers shared small words, gestures, and nods, each action slow and attentive, shaping quiet awareness through fatigue and relief. Snow and ice softened further, reflecting pale light and subtle movement, echoing the deliberate cadence of the town. Every step, glance, and breath contributed to the meditation of survival, calm and reflective. Bastogne rested slowly, attentive to memory, endurance, and the gentle pulse of continued life. By late afternoon, the town moved in slow, measured rhythm, each gesture and breath threading calm through reflection and attentive presence. Soldiers adjusted packs, blankets, and coats, each movement deliberate and aware, sustaining both care and connection. Civilians wandered carefully through softened streets, touching walls and door frames, eyes reflecting memory and relief. Letters and tokens of comfort were exchanged slowly, fragments of continuity, threading quietly through the reflective pulse of the day. Even distant sounds were softened by thawing snow, absorbed into rhythm rather than urgency, threading patience through awareness. And as shadows lengthened across rooftops and streets, Bastogne exhaled slowly, deliberate and gentle, holding its pulse steady. Soldiers shared soft nods and quiet words, every gesture and glance attentive, threading calm through fatigue and memory. Snow melted in irregular streams, carrying subtle reminders of endurance, survival, and care. Every breath, glance, and movement contributed to the slow meditation of reflection and presence. Bastogne rested in quiet rhythm, attentive to both what had passed and the delicate persistence of life. Winter light stretched gently across the Ardennes, long after the snow had melted from the streets of Bastogne. Soldiers, once figures of quiet endurance, now carried with them stories whispered in homes, printed in newspapers, and later shared across screens. Each name, McAuliffe, paratroopers, medics, was softly woven into memory, repeated with care, reverence, and attention. Letters home became testimony, fragments of lived experience transformed into shared narratives, small pieces of a collective heartbeat. Even civilians, their eyes carrying subtle recollection, contributed to the weaving of memory, their presence quietly threaded through stories told and retold. Snowfields, once silent witnesses, now existed as metaphors in recollection, frozen expanses shaping the imagination of those far away. And as words traveled, slow and deliberate, soldiers' deeds became emblematic, symbols of persistence rather than just isolated acts. Every retelling, measured and calm, carried the weight of both fidelity and interpretation, shaping how memory would settle. The town itself, quiet and reflective, seemed to exhale, carrying the rhythm of remembrance. Bastogne, enduring in stillness, began to occupy a space beyond mere geography, threading history and legend together in subtle motion. Newsreels captured the distant echoes of winter, the deliberate advance of soldiers, and the subtle pulse of endurance across frozen streets. Faces once hidden in cellars and foxholes now appeared in motion, eyes attentive and reflective, gestures slow and deliberate. Journalists recorded details softly, observing the rhythm of daily life after turmoil, focusing not on spectacle, but on persistence, threaded through frost, snow, and quiet streets. Letters, photographs, and whispered accounts were collected, preserved in archives that would later carry both memory and myth. Even the snowfields, once heavy with cold, became symbols of endurance, reflecting pale winter light in careful meditation. And as the world absorbed these fragments, soldiers became figures larger than themselves, touchstones of reflection and calm resilience. Every shared story, every printed word, and every quiet photograph carried forward both factual detail and subtle myth-making. Observers far and near threaded their attention through fragments of winter, hardship, and human determination. Each recounting deliberate and reflective shaped the quiet pulse of remembrance, and Bastogne in stillness and in story held both memory and legend with gentle persistence. The frozen landscape, once the measure of endurance, became a backdrop for memory, shaped slowly in minds and hearts. Soldiers' names were repeated, written, and whispered, becoming quiet symbols of steadfastness and patience under pressure. Civilians' experiences threaded alongside, contributing subtle texture to the growing narrative of perseverance. Letters preserved small human truths, gestures of care and fatigue, shaping stories told across time and distance. Even the snow, softened and melted, remained a silent participant, reflecting light and attention in memory's careful rhythm. And as accounts multiplied, the Siege of Bastogne moved from lived experience to emblematic story, shaping perception gently and deliberately. Each retelling balanced accuracy with reverence, weaving calm endurance into myth without haste or exaggeration. Soldiers' deeds were reframed as symbols, gestures distilled into lessons of patience and quiet courage. Observers' attention threaded through narrative, mapping reality into rhythm and story. Bastogne itself, reflective and attentive, absorbed memory with calm persistence, carrying both history and legend. Newspapers, letters, and oral histories converged softly, layering Bastogne's story into collective consciousness with gentle care. Soldiers' actions, once immediate and measured, were interpreted as enduring signs of resolve, their rhythm preserved in thought and attention. Civilians' quiet courage threaded subtly through narratives, shaping understanding in delicate reflection. Even snowfields, streets, and remnants of walls became touchstones, symbols of what had been endured, remembered, and honored. And as journalists and storytellers carried fragments of winter, frost, and endurance outward, Bastogne's presence expanded, a symbol threaded into distant minds. Every account, measured and deliberate, conveyed not only factual motion, but subtle emotion, shaping memory like careful brushstrokes on pale canvas. Soldiers' deeds were distilled into icons of calm perseverance, symbolic rather than literal, yet deeply human. Observers far away absorbed both story and rhythm, carrying reflection into homes, letters, and lecture halls. Every retelling became a meditation on endurance, shaping memory gently with care. And Bastogne's in quiet streets and soft reflection held itself steady, ready for the stories it would carry into time. Photographs and letters, carefully archived, became enduring fragments, each a meditation on presence, endurance, and rhythm. Soldiers' glances, gestures, and steps, once fleeting in snow and frost, were preserved through attention and retelling, soft yet insistent in their persistence. Civilian stories, folded into memory, reflected quiet awareness and slow resilience, a subtle pulse woven through narrative. Even distant hills, ridges, and forested paths, silent witnesses of endurance, carried meaning in recollection and story. And as news and memory spread, soldiers transformed gently into icons of measured courage, their rhythm of motion distilled into reflection. Every retelling letter and image threaded calm awareness through myth-making, deliberate and attentive, honoring both fact and emotion. Soldiers' small gestures became emblematic, echoes of endurance captured softly in narrative rhythm. Observers' attention, drawn gently through accounts, shaped perception without haste, threading story into reflection. Each repetition carried weight, building the quiet legend of Bastogne carefully over time, and in still streets, softened snow and attentive memory, Bastogne held both lived truth and symbolic presence. Film reels and storybooks later extended the reach of Bastogne's winter, carrying measured presence across continents and decades. Soldiers' names and deeds threaded slowly through scripts, letters, and recorded accounts, shaping myth with reverence and calm. Civilians' quiet endurance found reflection in narrative arcs, gestures of care preserved across time and media. Even the snow forests and frozen streets were carried into stories, transformed into symbols of persistence and delicate rhythm. And as memory expanded, the Siege of Bastogne became both factual account and emblematic meditation on endurance. Every narrative, deliberate and reflective, wove threads of human attention, patience, and quiet courage into legend. Soldiers' calm determination and measured action became timeless symbols, carefully distilled into story. Observers, reading, hearing, and viewing, absorbed both rhythm and presence, threading understanding through reflection. Each recounting became a gentle meditation on history, memory, and human continuity. Bastogne endured in story as it had in winter, holding both quiet fact and luminous legend with soft persistence. Letters, photographs, and fragments of conversation threaded together slowly, a quiet lattice shaping memory into legend. Soldiers' movements, once deliberate in frost, were reflected and amplified, symbols of measured patience and resilience. Civilians' endurance, subtle yet profound, was woven into story with careful attention and respect. Even melted snow and thawed streets became metaphors, reflecting the rhythm of endurance and attentive observation. And as stories multiplied across homes, schools, and screens, Bastogne's siege took on a life beyond time, a gentle rhythm carried through narrative. Each retelling preserved both observation and reflection, balancing presence with myth-making in soft cadence. Soldiers' gestures, small and measured, became icons of steadfastness, threaded carefully into story. Observers absorbed the rhythm of winter, endurance and attention, letting the pulse of memory settle slowly. Every word, image, and letter contributed to the gentle shaping of legend. Bastogne's attentive and reflective, exhaled quietly, carrying both lived experience and enduring symbol with measured calm. Through decades, the frozen Ardennes and Bastogne's streets became more than geography. They were touchstones of reflection and calm endurance. Soldiers' deeds, civilians' quiet courage, and the rhythm of survival threaded together, preserved in both memory and deliberate story. Letters, photographs, and soft recollections carried fragments of winter, snow, and endurance across time and space. Even distant hills, roads, and trees, once witnesses of fatigue and patience, found their place in narrative meditation. And as stories were told, retold, and reframed, Bastogne became a symbol threaded with reflection, rhythm, and subtle heroism. Each account measured and attentive, balanced accuracy and reverence, shaping memory into calm legend. Soldiers' careful movements, observed attentively, were distilled into gestures of endurance, emblematic rather than literal. Observers absorbed the rhythm of survival and reflection, letting the pulse of history settle in quiet awareness. Every story, image, and letter contributed to the gentle weaving of Bastogne's presence into time. and the town in still streets and remembered winter held its quiet pulse, alive in both memory and legend. Winter descends softly over Bastogne, its forests hushed, the snow blanketing streets and fields in slow, luminous rhythm. Rusting helmets rest among pale drifts, reminders of the men who once carried weight in frozen days, now quiet and still. Memorials worn by wind and time stand gently, each inscription, a subtle pulse of remembrance threading through snow and silence. The town itself breathes slowly, every cobblestone wall and tree, attentive to memory, holding both presence and absence in delicate balance. Visitors tread lightly, boots pressing gently into snow, their quiet steps reflecting thought and reflection. Even the wind moves softly through the pines, carrying faint whispers of endurance, stories folded into frost and evergreen. And in this measured quiet, Bastogne becomes both landscape and meditation, a place where memory settles with patience and reverence. Every glance, every hushed breath, threads awareness through the stillness of both town and forest. Life continues in subtle rhythms, intertwined with the quiet pulse of history preserved. The snow drifts over helmets and memorials, absorbing the weight of both past and present with luminous patience. The streets are soft underfoot, snow reflecting pale winter light in gentle arcs, shaping perception and presence in quiet continuity. Rusted fragments of equipment rest along alleys and corners, each carrying delicate resonance of endurance threaded through frozen days. Locals pass slowly, their movements deliberate, gestures measured, and eyes reflecting attention to both what remains and what has been endured. Even distant forests hold quiet presence, pines swaying softly in the winter breeze, threading rhythm into memory. Visitors pause at plaques, reading names aloud in hushed tones, connecting breath, thought, and story across time. And as footsteps continue through quiet streets, Bastogne unfolds gently, allowing reflection to settle slowly into every corner. Every glance at rooftops, memorials, and snow-laden streets threads presence into remembrance, careful and attentive. Snowflakes drift with subtle arcs, brushing stone and metal, carrying echoes of patience and human endurance. Soldiers' faces, preserved in memory and photographs, linger softly in reflection, threaded into attention like whispers on wind. The town, steady and deliberate, exhales in measured rhythm, attentive to the enduring pulse of history. Pines border the town like slow, silent sentinels, their branches weighed lightly with snow, bending under quiet pressure. Rusted vehicles, abandoned long ago, rest as muted witnesses, quiet markers of passage and patience. Letters and photographs, preserved in archives and homes, inform the hushed attention visitors bring to streets and memorials. Even the thawing streams reflect pale light across icy surfaces, threading subtle rhythm through observation and reflection. And as the day lengthens softly, Bastogne becomes a meditation on endurance, stillness, and attentive memory. Every hand brushing a plaque, every footstep in snow carries presence across time, deliberate and slow. Stories once shouted in urgency now unfold as quiet thought, reflecting patience and observation, threaded into legacy. Snow drifts over helmets, softening edges, absorbing sound, and threading calm through attention. Soldiers' and civilians' quiet acts of endurance persist as memory, folded into frost, trees, and stone. Bastogne rests in silence, each breath of wind and snowfall carrying delicate resonance of past endurance. Windows and doors, once shuttered against winter's blast, reflect soft light across empty streets, slow and reflective in rhythm. Rusted helmets lie beneath thin layers of snow, each a quiet reminder of presence, of lives threaded carefully through memory. Visitors pass with measured attention, breathing lightly, hands brushing lightly against stone and wood. Even the distant forest floor carries presence, fallen needles and twigs pressed gently under snow, shaping delicate awareness. And as footsteps continue through town and trail, Bastogne settles into meditation, attentive and steady, threading history into soft presence. Every glance at rooftops, walls and memorials carries careful thought, connecting story, place, and enduring reflection. Snow drifts across plaques, inscriptions softened under luminous winter light, threading calm through observation. Soldiers' faces linger in collective memory, eyes gentle and attentive across decades. Letters, diaries, and photographs continue to shape attention, threading past into the present with subtle rhythm. Bastogne, quiet under snow and pine, holds both memory and attention with delicate patience. The river, once frozen, moves gently under thin ice, carrying faint reflections of pale winter light across ripples and snow-laden banks. Rusted trucks, helmets and fragments of field equipment rest quietly, partially hidden beneath drifts and pine needles. Visitors tread slowly along paths, voices soft, breaths measured, gestures deliberate, threading presence through the still town. Even the trees sway with measured motion, branches whispering faintly to one another as wind passes through needles and snow, and as shadows lengthen over rooftops and streets. Bastogne's rhythm becomes both quiet and expansive, a meditation on enduring presence. Every glance, step, and soft word carries both reflection and attention, bridging past and present in gentle continuity. Snow drifts over plaques and memorials, softening edges, absorbing time, and threading patience through observation. Soldiers' actions recorded in letters, diaries, and memory linger quietly in thought, woven into attention. Civilians' courage and care are similarly present, threads of quiet endurance carried softly in remembrance. Bastogne exhales slowly, holding silence, memory and reflection in delicate balance beneath the winter pines. Faded bricks and cobblestones, softened under snow, trace the outlines of streets once alive with hurried steps, measured now in slow observation. Rusting helmets rest gently against walls and frozen earth, each a quiet witness of persistence and calm. Visitors pause, hands brushing stone, eyes reflecting attentiveness, breath steady and slow. Even the forest edges press gentle presence into the town, pines swaying lightly, their whisper threading rhythm through quiet awareness. And as snowflakes drift down softly, they settle across rooftops and memorials, carrying subtle resonance of endurance and careful remembrance. Every gesture, step, and observation threads patience through history, shaping attention with delicate precision. Soldiers' faces, names, and actions linger as quiet symbols, calm and attentive across time. Letters, diaries, and photographs inform reflective awareness, connecting past to present through slow, measured understanding. Snow drifts across metal and stone, absorbing echoes of the siege, threading presence into every corner. Bastogne rests beneath winter light and pine shadows, holding memory and reflection as luminous stillness. The town streets, softened by years and snow, carry echoes of footsteps long gone, deliberate and gentle in their persistence. Rusted artifacts, once instruments of duty, now rest as subtle markers of attention, memory, and quiet endurance. Visitors move carefully, touching plaques, adjusting scarves, noticing details with slow, reflective rhythm. Even the wind threads its presence through pines and rooftops, brushing gently against frozen surfaces and lingering quietly in corners. And as daylight fades softly, Bastogne becomes a meditation in presence, history, and calm observation. Every breath, step, and gentle movement threads reflection through memory, preserving attention across decades. Soldiers' deeds and civilians' care are preserved in both story and presence, subtle yet insistent in quiet rhythm. Snow blankets, pines sway, and stone endures, together shaping measured awareness of what was and what remains. Letters and photographs continue to inform understanding, threads of human experience folded into time and space. Bastogne breathes slowly beneath silent pines, attentive to both history and enduring presence. Time moves gently over Bastogne, softening edges, threading snow and memory through streets, fields, and forests. Rusting helmets, memorials, and frozen trails carry presence across generations, deliberate and reflective in rhythm. Visitors walk with attention, hands brushing stone, eyes tracing inscriptions, breaths measured and slow. Even the pines, swaying softly, carry subtle echoes of winter endurance and attentive remembrance. And as sunlight drifts through clouds, the town absorbs the rhythm of reflection, quiet and luminous, threading awareness through every corner. Every gesture, glance, and footstep contributes to meditation on memory, survival, and the pulse of history. Soldiers' names, civilians' courage, and the quiet endurance of both linger softly, woven into observation and thought. Snow drifts across helmets and plaques, absorbing echoes, reflecting light and threading calm into presence. Letters, diaries, and photographs continue to carry fragments of winter, attention, and careful reflection. In the frozen heart of Europe, the echoes of Bastogne still breathe, not as a tale of war, but as proof of what endures when all else falls silent.